Zog's first sensation was the smell, a pungent, eye-watering blend of damp stone, rotting wood, and something suspiciously like fermented cabbage. He opened his eyes to a vaulted ceiling of cracked obsidian, where thin shafts of sickly green light filtered through gaps in the masonry. For a moment, he thought he was in some corporate retreat gone horribly wrong, the kind where management tried to inspire innovation with medieval-themed team-building exercises. Then the memories flooded in. Tanaka Kenji, 34-year-old corporate analyst for a Tokyo logistics firm, had died in a subway accident. Crushed between platforms during rush hour, his last thought had been about an overdue report on supply chain optimization. Now, he was someone else. A body that felt too small, too wiry, with greenish skin and clawed fingers. He sat up on a stone slab that served as a bed, draped in moth-eaten black velvet, and looked down at himself. Goblin-like, with pointed ears and sharp teeth, clad in tattered leather armor. The name came unbidden, Zog, Demon Lord of the Bleak Spire. The title sounded impressive, but the reality was anything but. His new home was a chamber about the size of a studio apartment, with walls of crumbling black stone. A single rusted brazier emitted a feeble glow, casting long shadows over piles of debris, broken furniture, moldy scrolls, and what looked like the bones of small animals. 3 figures huddled in a corner, shivering. They were imps, barely 3 feet tall, with bat-like wings and hungry eyes. Their ribs showed through mottled skin, and they stared at Zog with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Master Zog, you're awake," one of them squeaked, its voice like grinding gravel. We have no food. The last rat was 2 days ago." Zog's mind raced. Demon Lord? In his previous life, he'd managed warehouse logistics, not dark armies. But before he could process it further, a sharp pain lanced through his temples. Visions flashed, spreadsheets, flowcharts, real-time data streams, all superimposed over his field of view. A cool, mechanical voice echoed in his mind. Tactical Oversight Network activated. Initializing for user, Zog, Demon Lord of Logistics. Scanning territory, A translucent interface materialized before his eyes, glowing with faint blue light. It displayed stats in neat columns. Morale 1%, critical, imps near rebellion. Resources 3 units of fungus, 0.5 units of water, 0 units of weapons. Efficiency 5%, abysmal, systems disorganized. Population 4, 1 demon lord, 3 imps. Threat level low, territory unstable. Zog blinked. This was his cheat? Not fireballs or necromancy, but a logistics dashboard. He almost laughed. It was like being handed a corporate performance report in the middle of a fantasy apocalypse. But the analyst in him kicked in. Data. He could work with data. "What's your name?" Zog asked the imp who had spoken, his voice raspier than he expected. "Grick, master," the imp said, bowing its head. "These are Snarl and Fizz. We serve you." The other 2 imps nodded weakly. Zog stood, his legs wobbling. He was shorter than he'd been as Tanaka, maybe 5 feet tall, but he moved with a quick, agile grace. He paced the room, ignoring the prompts that flickered in his vision. Dark magic tutorial available, summon minor fiends and combat skills, basic claw attacks. Instead, he focused on the Tactical Oversight Network. With a thought, he zoomed in on the resource breakdown. The 3 units of fungus came from a farm in a nearby cavern, a patch of glowing mushrooms that grew in the dark. The network showed its yield was at 10% of potential due to poor nutrient distribution. The 0.5 units of water was from a leaky cistern. And there was something else, a resource listed as organic waste, with a note, manure collection system inactive. Potential fertilizer source, Zog's eyes lit up. In his old job, he'd optimized waste management for a shipping company, turning byproducts into profit. Here, it could mean survival. But before he could act, a commotion came from the corridor outside. A 4th imp, smaller and covered in dust, scurried in, panting. "Master! Scouts!" "Humans," it gasped, collapsing at Zog's feet. Grick helped it up. "What is it, Twitch?" A hero party, Twitch wheezed. 4 of them. Paladin in shiny armor, elf archer, dwarf with an axe, and a rogue mage. They're moving fast through the deadwood forest. I saw them from the high rocks. They'll be here in hours. Maybe 3 or 4. The other imps whimpered. Grick looked at Zog, eyes wide with terror. Master, we must flee. Or prepare defenses. We have no magic, no army. Just us. Zog's heart pounded, but the Tactical Oversight Network remained calm, updating in real time. A new alert appeared, asterisk threat detected, hero party, level, moderate. Estimated arrival, 3.5 hours. Recommended action, evacuate or fortify asterisk, but Zog dismissed it. Evacuate to where? This crumbling spire was all he had. And fortify with what? He had no weapons, no troops. Then he looked at the stats again. Morale at 1%. Resources near 0. But the manure collection system, if he could activate it, use it to boost the fungus farm, maybe they could at least eat. And full stomachs might raise morale. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. Grick, show me the farm and the waste areas, Zog commanded, his voice firming. Twitch, keep scouting, update me every 30 minutes on the hero's progress. Snarl and Fizz, come with me. The imps stared, confused. They'd expected orders for spellcasting or trap building, not whatever this was. But Zog's demeanor, calm, analytical, held a strange authority. Grick led him out of the chamber, down a narrow, winding staircase carved into the rock. The bleak spire was a sorry excuse for a castle. Its halls were littered with rubble, its walls wept moisture, and the air grew colder as they descended. The farm is here, master, Grick said, pushing open a rotten wooden door. The cavern beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness. In one corner, a patch of bioluminescent mushrooms glowed with a soft blue light, the fungus farm. It was haphazard, mushrooms growing in clumps with bare earth between them. The Tactical Oversight Network displayed an overlay, asterisk yield, 3 units/month. Potential, 30 units/month with optimized conditions. Deficiency, nitrogen-rich fertilizer, asterisk. Nearby, a smaller tunnel reeked of ammonia. Zog peered in. It was a latrine area, used by the imps and whatever previous inhabitants had been here. Piles of waste lay in corners, buzzing with flies. The network pinged, asterisk organic waste detected, 15 units. Convertible to fertilizer via basic composting, asterisk. Zog's mind clicked into gear. This wasn't about magic, it was about process. He turned to the imps. Snarl, Fizz, I need you to gather all this waste. Use those broken buckets over there. Grick, find me any tools. Shovels, rakes, anything. The imps hesitated. Master, the heroes, Snarl muttered. The heroes won't care about our farm if we starve first, Zog said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Do it. Now. They scrambled. Zog accessed the network, pulling up a schematic for a simple composting system. It projected a holographic blueprint over the latrine area, a pit lined with stones, layers of waste and dry vegetation, turned regularly. He directed the imps as they worked, his commands precise. Deeper, Snarl. Mix in those dead leaves, Fizz. Grick, bring water from the cistern, just a little, to moisten it. As they labored, Zog monitored the stats. Morale ticked up to 2%, tiny, but something. The imps were confused, but they saw action, purpose. He explained as they worked, his corporate training slipping out. This waste is an asset. We're converting liability into productivity. In a few days, it'll break down into fertilizer. Spread on the farm, it'll triple our yields. Grick paused, shovel in hand. Master, you speak strangely. But it makes sense. We always just threw it away. Zog allowed a grim smile. Efficiency, Grick. It's how we survive. Twitch returned, breathless. The heroes have reached the forest's edge. 2 hours, maybe less. They're moving slow, checking for traps. Time was running out. Zog had the composting pit started, but it wouldn't be ready in time. He needed immediate results. The network highlighted another option, *emergency boost, use available resources to enhance farm yield temporarily. Risk, resource depletion, *. He checked the fungus farm, the mushrooms grew fast in this magical environment. With a concentrated dose of nutrients, they might sprout new growth in hours. Grick, bring half the current fungus harvest, Zog ordered. We're going to make a tea. The imp stared. Tea, master? A nutrient solution. Crush the mushrooms, mix with water, pour it over the farm. It'll stimulate growth. It was a trick he'd read about in an agricultural report once, using existing crops to boost others. Desperate times. They worked feverishly. Zog crushed mushrooms with a stone, his claws making quick work. Fizz brought water from the cistern, now down to 0.3 units. They mixed it into a foul-smelling slurry and poured it over the fungus patch. The network showed a real-time update, * yield projection increased to 6 units in 24 hours. Morale, 3%. Resources, 2 units fungus, 0.3 units water, *. It was something. But not enough. As they finished, a distant rumble echoed through the cavern. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Twitch dashed in again, eyes wild. They're here. At the outer gates. The paladin is pounding on the door with his hammer. Panic surged, but Zog forced it down. The Tactical Oversight Network flashed, * critical alert, defense systems inactive. Options, 1. Surrender. 2. Hide. 3. Improvise * he chose 3. To the gates, Zog said, leading the imps back up the stairs. But not to fight. To negotiate. The imps gasped. Negotiate? With heroes? They'll slay us on sight. Grick cried. Maybe, Zog said. But we have nothing to lose. And I have a plan. They reached the main hall of the spire, a vast, empty space with a crack thrown at one end and giant iron doors at the other. The pounding was louder now, rhythmic and thunderous. Zog peered through a crack in the doors. Outside, in a courtyard of weeds and broken statues, stood the hero party. The paladin, a giant in gleaming plate armor, swung a warhammer against the gates. The elf, sleek and deadly, had an arrow nocked. The dwarf spat on the ground, hefting his axe. The mage chanted, hands glowing with energy. Zog's network analyzed them, * paladin, high durability, low mobility. Elf, high precision, low defense. Dwarf, moderate all. Mage, high magic, low physical. Weakness, reliant on supply lines for sustained campaigns, *. Supply lines. That was it. Zog turned to the imps. Grick, take Snarl and Fizz. There's a side tunnel, the old garbage chute. It leads outside, behind the heroes. I need you to create a distraction. Not an attack. Make noise, throw rocks, anything to draw their attention. Then run. Don't get caught. What will you do, master? Grick asked, trembling. I'm going to talk, Zog said. And hope they're as predictable as my old bosses. As the imps scurried away, Zog took a deep breath. His only defense was a hastily improved supply chain, a pit of composting waste and a slightly better fungus farm. But it was a start. He straightened his tattered armor, pushed open the gates just a crack, and stepped into the light. The heroes froze, weapons raised. The paladin lowered his hammer, eyes narrowing. Demon! Prepare to meet your end. Zog held up his hands, claws open. I propose a trade, he said, his voice steady. Information for time. The mage sneered. What could a goblin like Demon know? I know your supply wagon is stuck in the mud, 2 miles east, Zog said, bluffing based on the network's terrain data. I know your rations are low because the dwarf ate double shares last night. And I know you're here not for glory, but because your kingdom pays per demon slain. The heroes exchanged glances, shocked. Zog's network showed their morale dipping slightly, confusion setting in. The paladin stepped forward. "How do you know this?" "Logistics," Zog said, allowing a smirk. "Now, here's my offer, leave today, and I'll tell you how to fix your wagon axle. Stay, and you'll find nothing here but hunger and well-organized waste." Before they could respond, a cacophony erupted from behind the imps, howling and throwing stones. The heroes spun, distracted. Zog ducked back inside, slamming the gates. He leaned against them, heart racing. The network updated, * morale, 5%. Resources stable. Threat, heroes hesitating, *. Outside, the paladin's voice boomed. "This is a trick. Breach the gate." But the pounding didn't resume immediately. Zog heard arguing, the elf urging caution, the dwarf grumbling about food. He smiled grimly. He'd bought minutes, maybe more. And in that time, he realized, his true power wasn't in dark magic or armies. It was in data, in supply chains, in turning manure into a defense. The heroes at the gates were just the first test. And Zog, Demon Lord of Logistics, was ready to optimize his way to survival. The heavy oak gates groaned under the first impact, sending a shower of ancient dust cascading from the rafters of the command chamber. Zog flinched, his goblin-like ears twitching at the sound. Through the narrow arrow slit in the stone wall, he could see the silhouettes of 4 figures, the hero party from the scout's report. A tall knight in gleaming plate armor, a robed mage with a staff crackling with energy, a lithe archer knocking an arrow, and a cleric whose holy symbol glowed with an ominous light. "My lord," squeaked Grub, the smallest of the 3 imps, his bat-like wings fluttering nervously. "They're breaking through. Should we cast a spell? I found a scroll about summoning minor imps in the library." Zog ignored him, his eyes fixed on the translucent interface floating in his mind, the Tactical Oversight Network. It displayed real-time data in crisp corporate-style dashboards. Resource status. Toxic fungi, harvested 42 units. Reinforced pit traps, 3 deployed. Morale, 23%, from 15%. Castle structural integrity, 12%. "No spells, Grub," Zog said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his new body. He'd been Tanaka, a mid-level logistics analyst, just yesterday or whatever passed for yesterday in this bizarre reincarnation. Now he was Zog, Demon Lord of Logistics, with a castle that was more hole than wall and an army of 3 malnourished imps. "We stick to the plan. Status on Pit 3? Snarl, the imp with a chipped horn, scurried forward. "Ready, boss." Lined it with the extra fungal concentrate from the optimized harvest. Even got some of that manure accelerated growth on the edges for extra squishiness. Zog nodded. The network had identified the castle's sole asset, a patch of gloomcap fungi in the eastern courtyard. Normally, it was a nuisance toxic enough to cause hallucinations in small doses, fatal in large ones. But after yesterday's frantic optimization of the manure collection system, who knew demonic imps produced such nutrient-rich waste, the yield had tripled. The network's efficiency algorithms had suggested concentrating the toxins into a viscous paste, perfect for lining traps. Another crash echoed through the castle. The gates shuddered, a crack splintering down the middle. Zog's heart hammered against his ribs. In his old life, the biggest crisis had been a missed quarterly report. Here, it was literal heroes trying to kill him. "They're overconfident," Zog muttered, more to himself than the imps. The network's psychological profile module, a feature he hadn't expected, flashed an analysis: hero party morale, 98%. Confidence, extreme. Assumption, minimal resistance from weak Demon Lord, ***. He could use that. Grub, to the western parapet. Use the signal flags, remember the sequence I showed you. Snarl, you're with me. Gristle, monitor the network for any resource depletion alerts. The third imp, Gristle, who had a fondness for counting things, nodded eagerly, his eyes glued to a mental projection only Zog could fully see. Zog moved through the crumbling corridors, his clawed feet scraping on stone. The castle was a nightmare of inefficiency, rooms with no purpose, blocked passages, and a distinct lack of any meaningful inventory system. But the network helped. It highlighted the fastest route to the outer courtyard, avoiding sections with integrity below 5%. As they reached a collapsed archway overlooking the courtyard, Zog peered down. The heroes had breached the gates. The knight led the way, his sword held high. "By the light of the sun god, we cleanse this foul place," he boomed. The mage chuckled, a dry, academic sound. "Scanning for magical defenses, minimal. As expected from a minor demonic entity. This should be a straightforward extermination." Zog's lips curled into something resembling a smile. "Oh, they had no idea." "Now, snarl," he whispered. The imp yanked a hidden lever, a rusted piece of machinery Zog had repurposed from an old drawbridge mechanism. With a groan of protesting metal, a section of the courtyard floor gave way. Not dramatically, but with a precise, engineered collapse. The network had calculated the exact stress points based on the castle's structural data. The knight vanished first, his triumphant shout cutting off into a startled yelp. The archer, light on her feet, leaped back, but the ground beneath her crumbled too. A secondary pit Zog had ordered dug just last night, lined with sharpened stakes coated in gloomcap paste. She fell with a cry, her bow clattering away. "Traps," the mage snarled, raising his staff. A bolt of fire shot toward Zog's position, but he was already moving, the network flashing a warning trajectory. The fireball splashed against stone, doing little more than blackening the already soot-stained walls. "Morale update," Gristle's voice piped in Zog's mind through the network's comlink feature. "Another surprise. Imps at 31%. Rising." "There, laughing?" Zog risked a glance. Grub was waving flags from the parapet, not in any code, but in a gleeful jig. Snarl was hopping from foot to foot, pointing at the pits. They were seeing results. Efficiency in action. For imps used to starvation and neglect, this was better than any dark ritual. Down in the courtyard, the cleric rushed to the edge of the main pit. "Sir Gareth. Can you hear me?" A muffled curse echoed from below. "I'm stuck. The walls are slimy. And it smells like rotten mushrooms and something worse." The mage's eyes narrowed, scanning the pit. "It's a toxin. Low level, but concentrated. Gareth, don't breathe deeply. I'll levitate you out." As the mage began an incantation, Zog acted. Grub, secondary distraction. Use the manure stockpile, the one by the eastern wall. The optimized batch, boss? Exactly. A moment later, a barrel tumbled from the parapet, shattering near the mage's feet. It wasn't an attack, just a spill of reeking, nutrient-dense manure. The mage gagged, his concentration broken. The levitation spell fizzled. "You filthy creature," the cleric shouted, brandishing her holy symbol. A wave of light burst forth, scouring the courtyard. It washed over Zog, and for a second, he felt a searing pain, a reminder that he was, technically, a demonic entity. But the network flashed, divine energy resistance, moderate. Sustained exposure detrimental, ***. He ducked behind cover, his mind racing. The heroes were disorganized now. The knight trapped, the archer injured, the mage distracted, the cleric forced into healing duty. But they weren't defeated. The network's combat prediction module gave a 40% chance of their recovery and eventual victory if Zog didn't press the advantage. Gristle, resource check. Toxic fungi down to 18 units, boss. Morale at 35%. Structural integrity at 9%. That last spell rattled the foundations. Zog made a decision. He stood, stepping into view on the broken archway. The cleric looked up, her eyes wide with hatred. "Demon! Face the justice of the..." "Let's talk efficiency," Zog interrupted, his voice carrying an unnatural calm. He gestured to the pits. "You're stuck. Your knight is incapacitated by a toxin that, according to my data, will induce paralysis in approximately 10 minutes without antidote. Your archer has a compound fracture and possible fungal infection. Your mage is, well, he's ankle deep in high-quality fertilizer. The mage flushed with rage. You dare mock us? I'm assessing the situation, Zog said, tapping his temple. My network tells me you have two options. 1. Continue this assault. I have 3 more trap sections ready to deploy, and my imps are motivated, morale is rising by the second. You might kill me, but at what cost? Your party's viability will drop to 0. The network helpfully projected a graph showing party viability plummeting. The cleric paled. Option 2, Zog continued. You retreat. Tend to your wounded. My calculations suggest a 95% survival rate if you extract within 5 minutes. I'll even provide the antidote for the toxin, it's just a distilled version of the same fungi, easily synthesized with my current resources. The knight's voice echoed from the pit, strained. He's bluffing. Demons lie. Do I? Zog said. He nodded to Snarl, who scurried forward and tossed a small vial down to the cleric. It landed at her feet, filled with a clear liquid. That's the antidote. Test it if you want. My network guarantees its efficacy. The cleric hesitated, then snatched it up. She uncorked it, sniffed, and her eyes widened. It's pure. No taint. The mage stared at Zog, his anger giving way to confusion. Who are you? Demons don't negotiate. They don't use networks or efficiency. I'm the Demon Lord of Logistics, Zog said, allowing a hint of pride to seep into his voice. And I've just demonstrated that proper resource management can outperform brute force. Now, I'd recommend you leave. Your knight's paralysis is progressing down to 9 minutes. The network updated, knight's toxin load, 78%. Paralysis threshold, 85%. The cleric made the decision. She poured the antidote into the pit, then helped the mage haul the knight out. The archer limped over, her face pale with pain. They gathered, shooting Zog looks of utter bewilderment. This wasn't how hero stories went. There was no epic clash, no dark magic, just pits, poison, and a demon talking like a corporate middle manager. This isn't over, the knight muttered, his limbs still weak. I'm sure it isn't, Zog said. But next time, bring a better supply chain. Your current one seems fragile. They retreated, stumbling through the broken gates, their confidence shattered. Zog watched them go, his body trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. He'd survived. Not with spells or strength, but with data and optimization. Boss. Grub flew down, landing beside him. We did it. They ran. And the fungi harvest is already replenishing, the manure acceleration is working better than projected. Snarl grinned, showing pointed teeth. Morale's at 45%, boss. The imps are chanting your name. Well, they're chanting Zog. Zog. He makes the bad humans go away. Close enough. Zog allowed himself a moment of relief. The network displayed the results, hero party repelled. Casualties, 0, enemy. Resources depleted, 24%. Morale, 45%. Efficiency gain, plus 12%. But as he turned to head back inside, to start planning the next phase, unionizing goblins, perhaps, or expanding trade, the network pinged. A sharp, urgent sound in his mind. He froze. The interface flashed red, a new alert window popping up. Alert, large-scale mobilization detected. Location, Human Kingdom's eastern border. Force composition, estimated 500+ units. Include siege engines, cavalry, and multiple hero-class entities, ***. Estimated time to territory border, 14 days. Threat level, critical. Zog's brief triumph evaporated. He stared at the data, the corporate part of his brain already whirring with projections and risk assessments. 500 soldiers. Siege engines. Multiple heroes. Against his 3 imps and a crumbling castle. Boss? Gristle asked, noticing his silence. What is it? Zog didn't answer immediately. He looked at the imps, their hopeful faces, their rising morale. Then back at the network, with its cold, hard numbers. 14 days. To build something that could withstand an army. Not with magic, but with logistics. With supply chains. With unions and profit sharing and optimized fungus farms. He took a deep breath, the air still tinged with the scent of manure and gloomcap. We've got work to do, he said softly. A lot of work. And in the back of his mind, the network began running new simulations, its algorithms churning through possibilities, searching for the most efficient path to survival. The first battle was over. The war was just beginning. The morning after the hero's retreat, Zog stood on the crumbling battlements of his castle, the Tactical Oversight Network humming in his mind like a persistent spreadsheet. The data was grim, resource reserves at 12%, morale among his 3 imps at 45% and dropping as the adrenaline of survival faded, and a countdown timer showing 13 days, 7 hours until the human army arrived. The castle itself was a testament to neglect, moss-covered stone, collapsed sections of wall, and a pervasive smell of damp and decay that even his optimized manure collection couldn't fully mask. We need more than imps, Zog muttered to himself, his goblin-like fingers tracing the rough stone. The network pinged with a new alert, territory scan complete, 3 goblin tribes detected within 5-mile radius. Estimated population, 87. Condition, squalor. Productivity, 8% of potential. He blinked, the numbers overlaying his vision like a corporate dashboard. This wasn't just a fantasy world, it was an operations nightmare waiting for a solution. Descending into the courtyard, where his 3 imps, Grick, Snarl, and Blip, were listlessly poking at the fungus farms, Zog called them over. We're expanding the team, he announced, his voice firmer than he felt. There are goblins nearby living in pits. We're going to offer them a better deal. Grick, the largest imp with a perpetual squint, scratched his head. Boss, goblins are stupid. They fight over rotten meat. Not if we give them something to fight for, Zog replied, the network already calculating potential wage structures. Gather what supplies we have, extra fungus, tools from the storage room. We're going recruiting. An hour later, Zog led his small party into the dense, mist-shrouded woods south of the castle. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decay, and gnarled roots snaked across the path. The network provided a mini-map in his mind's eye, highlighting the nearest goblin tribe's location with a pulsing red dot. As they approached, the signs of poverty became evident, crude shelters made of mud and sticks, piles of garbage, and the hollow-eyed stares of goblins huddled around a meager fire. The tribe's leader, a grizzled goblin named Crag with a scar across his snout and a rusty dagger at his belt, stepped forward, flanked by 2 burly guards. Who invades Crag's land? He snarled, baring yellowed teeth. Zog raised his hands, palms open. No invasion. I'm Zog, Demon Lord of this territory. I'm here to make an offer. Crag laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Demon Lord? You look like a skinny goblin who lost his lunch. What offer? We have nothing but dirt and hunger. Zog gestured to the imps, who nervously presented baskets of freshly harvested glowfungus, its pale light illuminating the gloomy clearing. This is from my optimized farms. With your help, we can produce 10 times this amount. I'm proposing a union. Confusion rippled through the goblins. Union? Crag spat. Magic words won't fill bellies. Let me explain, Zog said, his corporate training kicking in. He crouched, drawing a simple diagram in the dirt with a stick. Right now, you scavenge what you can, fight over scraps, and live in filth. Under my system, every goblin who works gathering resources, farming, building, gets a fair wage, a daily share of food, tools, and shelter upgrades. He tapped the diagram. Plus, profit sharing, 20% of all excess resources we gather goes into a communal fund, distributed based on merit. Work harder, get more. The network displayed real-time data, morale among goblins, 15%. Interest level, rising. Estimated efficiency gain with union, 110%. Zog could see the goblins leaning in, their eyes widening at the mention of consistent food. Crag crossed his arms, suspicion etched on his face. Why you do this? Demon Lord's take, not give. Because a hungry worker is an inefficient worker, Zog said bluntly. In 14 days, a human army is coming to kill us all. I need this territory running at peak productivity to survive. Your labor is my resource, and I invest in my resources. He paused, letting the words sink in. Join me, and you won't just survive, you'll thrive. Refuse, and you'll starve here or die when the humans burn these woods. A younger goblin, thin with eager eyes, stepped forward. I want food every day. I'll work. Others murmured agreement, the promise of security breaking through their apathy. But Crag's expression darkened. You promise future food, but I see food now. He pointed at the baskets. Give us all that, and we'll think about it. Zog felt a flicker of annoyance. This was the classic short-term thinking that doomed so many startups. The network flashed, conflict detected, goblin leader demanding immediate spoils. Risk of rebellion, 40%. He took a deep breath, his mind racing through negotiation tactics. Crag, if I give it all away, there's nothing to grow. But I'll make you a deal, prove your value, and you'll be rewarded. He stood, addressing the whole tribe. I'm instituting a merit-based promotion system. Every goblin starts as a laborer. Exceed quotas, show initiative, and you rise to specialist, then foreman, with increased shares and authority. He turned back to Crag. You're a leader here. Lead your people into this union, ensure they work hard, and I'll promote you to head of resource gathering, double rations, a private shelter, and a say in operations. Crag's eyes narrowed, calculating. The network showed his morale shifting from hostile to cautiously interested. Double rations? And I keep my dagger? Keep your dagger, Zog agreed. But violence is for defense only. Under my rule, we solve problems with efficiency, not blades. After a tense moment, Crag grunted and nodded. We join. But if you cheat us, I'll cut your throat myself. Zog smiled, though it felt strange on his goblin face. Fair enough. Now, let's get to work. First task, clean up this camp. The network says sanitation boosts productivity by 15%. Over the next 2 days, Zog oversaw the transformation. The goblins, initially skeptical, threw themselves into the work with surprising vigor once they saw the results. Using the network's real-time data, Zog assigned tasks based on skill levels, some cleared debris, others expanded the fungus farms with optimized layouts that the network calculated would triple yields, and a few with an eye for detail began constructing sturdier huts from gathered timber. Morale soared, the network displaying a steady climb to 65% as goblins received their first daily rations of fungus stew and repaired tools. Crag, true to his word, proved an effective foreman, barking orders and keeping the lazier goblins in line. Zog made a point to praise him publicly, reinforcing the merit system. See that, he said to the tribe one evening, as they gathered around a larger, cleaner fire. Crag's team gathered 30% more stone today than projected. That means extra shares for everyone tomorrow. A cheer went up, and Zog felt a flicker of pride. This was better than any quarterly report back in his old life. But the peace was short-lived. On the third day, as Zog was reviewing supply chain data with the network, a commotion erupted at the edge of the camp. A group of goblins led by a hulking brute named Gron, Crag's rival, surrounded Crag, shouting and waving crude clubs. Crag gets double food while we sweat. Gron roared, his voice thick with resentment. We want our share now, not promises. Zog hurried over, the network alerting, crisis, factional dispute. Morale drop detected, minus 10%. Risk of violence, high. He pushed through the crowd, standing between Crag and Gron. What's the problem? Gron blared, spittle flying. Problem is, you favor Crag. We work hard too. Give us spoils, or we leave. His followers growled in agreement. Zog's mind raced. This was a classic union negotiation gone sour, grievances over perceived inequality. He held up his hands. Gron, you're right. Hard work should be rewarded. But looting now would ruin what we've built. He turned to the gathered goblins, his voice calm but firm. The merit system is fair. Craig earned his position by organizing the stone gathering. Gron, your team excels at foraging, I've seen the data. From today, I'm creating a new role, foraging specialist, with increased shares for top performers. He accessed the network, projecting a simple leaderboard onto a nearby flatstone using a trick of light from the glow fungus. See? Gron's team is second in productivity. Keep it up, and you'll be promoted next week. The goblins crowded around, pointing and arguing, but the anger began to dissipate as they saw their names listed with metrics. Gron hesitated, then grumbled, fine. But I want that promotion. Earn it, Zog said. Now, back to work. We have a human supply caravan passing near the eastern border in 6 hours. I need a raid team, volunteers get triple shares for success. The goblins erupted in excitement, the conflict forgotten in the face of tangible reward. Craig stepped forward. I'll lead it. My scouts found the route. Zog nodded. Take 10 of your best. Use the tactics I outlined, disable the guards non-lethally if possible, hijack the wagons, and bring everything back. The network will guide you with real-time updates. As the raid party assembled, Zog felt a mix of anxiety and determination. This was the first test of his unionized workforce, not in defense, but in proactive economic action. He watched them slip into the woods, their green forms blending with the foliage, and returned to the castle to monitor via the network's remote feed. Hours later, as dusk painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, the raid party returned, cheering and dragging 2 laden wagons. The goblins were bruised but triumphant, their morale now at 85% according to the network. Craig approached Zog, grinning widely. Success, boss. We ambushed them at a choke point, used nets and clubs like you said. Got food, weapons, and this. He held up a small chest, opening it to reveal glittering gold coins. Zog's eyes widened. The network calculated, resources increased, plus 200%. Morale boost, significant. Efficiency gain validated. He clapped Craig on the shoulder. Excellent work. Distribute the shares as promised, triple for the raiders, and a bonus for you as leader. As the goblins celebrated, feasting on stolen human rations, Zog stood apart, watching the data flow. The Union was working, production had doubled, morale was high, and they'd struck their first blow against the human supply lines. But the network pinged with a new alert, Human Army ETA, 12 days. Resource reserves, 45%. Next phase, expand operations. He smiled grimly. They had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt not like a weak demon lord, but a CEO building an empire, one optimized supply chain at a time. The morning after Craig's successful raid, Zog stood in the central chamber of his crumbling castle, the Tactical Oversight Network glowing behind his eyes. The data streams were a comforting hum, a reminder of his old life as Tanaka, where spreadsheets and KPIs had been his weapons. Now, they were quite literally his survival. He focused on the resource dashboard. Morale, 68%. A significant jump from the single digits of his first days. Gold reserves, 150 pieces from the hijacked caravan. Weapons and tools, adequate for now. But his gaze lingered on the food reserves bar, pulsing a warning red at 12%. The 3 imps, Grick, Snarl, and Blip, hovered nearby, their green faces anxious as they watched their lord's expression. We've tripled our workforce with the goblin unions, Zog muttered, more to himself than to them. But that means triple the mouths to feed. At current consumption rates, we'll be out of food in 4 days. He zoomed in on the food production data. The fungus farms, clusters of pale, bulbous mushrooms grown in the castle's damp lower levels, were operating at only 35% efficiency. The layout was haphazard, patches scattered randomly, with poor lighting from bioluminescent moss and inconsistent moisture levels. In his corporate days, Tanaka had optimized warehouse layouts to shave seconds off picking times. This was no different, just with more spores and less cardboard. Grick, Zog said, turning to the lead imp. Gather the goblin foreman. And bring Crag. We're overhauling the farms. Within the hour, Zog stood in the largest fungus chamber, a cavernous space with dripping stalactites and a faint, earthy smell. 24 goblins, including Crag, still wearing a proud smirk from yesterday's raid, crowded around, their eyes wide with curiosity. Zog's network projected a holographic layout of the chamber into his vision, highlighting inefficiencies in cool blue. "Listen up," Zog began, his voice echoing off the stone. "Our food output is pathetic. We're wasting space, light, and nutrients. Here's the new plan." He gestured with a clawed hand, and the goblins leaned in. Using the network's real-time data, he directed them in a flurry of activity. They cleared out cluttered patches, creating organized rows with precise spacing calculated for optimal growth. Zog had them reposition the bioluminescent moss into overhead grids, ensuring even coverage. He introduced a simple irrigation system using hollowed logs to channel moisture from a nearby seep, eliminating dry spots. Crag scratched his head, watching a group of goblins measure distances with knotted ropes. "Lord Zog, this seems fussy. We've always just tossed spores and hoped for the best." "Hope isn't a strategy," Zog replied, his tone dry. "Data is. Look here." He pointed to a patch where yields were historically low. The network showed soil acidity was off, a quick adjustment with crushed limestone from the raid's spoils fixed it. As they worked, Zog monitored morale ticks upward. The goblins, though confused, appreciated the clear instructions and the promise of full bellies. By dusk, the transformation was stark. The fungus farms now resembled a well-ordered garden, with plump mushrooms already showing improved growth rates. The network updated, efficiency at 87%, projected yield increase of 300% within a week. Zog allowed himself a small smile. One bottleneck solved. But as he reviewed the data, a new alert pinged. Kobold scouts, small, reptilian humanoids known for their stealth, had returned from the eastern borders. Zog met them in the war room, a makeshift space with a stone table carved with rough maps. The lead scout, a kobold named Sisk with scales the color of tarnished copper, bowed low. "Report," Zog said, leaning over the table. Sisk hissed softly. "The human army, Lord. They gather at Fort Ironhold, 2 weeks' march away. Their numbers, many. Thousands. And their supply trains, wagons laden with grain, weapons, siege engines. They are well-fed and well-armed." Zog's mind raced. The network overlaid the scouts' data, enemy strength estimates, supply line routes, travel times. The humans weren't just coming, they were coming prepared. Brute force would be suicide. He needed more than goblins and fungus. "What of the lands between us and them?" Zog asked. Sisk's tongue flicked. "Neutral territories. Monster villages, kobold clans, a few harpy roosts, even a troll enclave. They trade scraps with humans sometimes, but mostly keep to themselves." An idea sparked. Expansion through trade, not conquest. If he could secure allies and resources from these neutrals, he could outflank the humans logistically. The network highlighted a kobold village to the north, known for its metalworking skills. "Perfect. Prepare a trade delegation," Zog ordered. "We leave at dawn. Crag, you're in charge here. Keep the farms running and the unions happy. Sisk, you'll guide me." The next morning, Zog set out with Sisk and a small escort of goblins, laden with trade goods, excess fungus from the improved farms, gold coins from the raid, and simple tools. The journey took a day through dense, mist-shrouded forests. Zog's network mapped their path, avoiding predator dens and unstable terrain. He noted how Sisk moved with silent grace, a natural scout, another asset to optimize. The kobold village, called Emberclaw, was nestled in a rocky hillside, with smoke from forges curling into the sky. The kobolds here were larger than Sisk, with soot-stained scales and keen eyes. They watched Zog's approach warily, weapons in hand. Their chieftain, a broad-shouldered kobold named Vorsk, stepped forward, a hammer slung at his belt. "Demon Lord," Vorsk rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "Why come to Emberclaw? We have no quarrel with you, nor love for humans." Zog kept his posture open, non-threatening. I come to trade, not fight. My network shows your forges produce fine steel, but your food stores are low. We have surplus fungus and gold. A mutual benefit. He gestured, and the goblins laid out the goods. Vorsk inspected a mushroom, sniffing it. Your kind usually takes by force. Why trade? Because force is inefficient, Zog said, tapping his temple where the network glowed faintly. I know your yields, you lose 20% of ore-to-pour smelting techniques. I can help optimize that. In return, we trade food for weapons, and perhaps an alliance. Vorsk's eyes narrowed. How could you know our losses? Zog smiled, a thin, calculating expression. Data. Let me show you. He spent the next hours in Emberclaw's forge, using the network to analyze their processes. The Kobolds used bellows inefficiently, wasting heat. Their ore sorting was haphazard. Zog suggested simple changes, repositioning the bellows for better airflow, creating a graded system for ore quality. He even sketched a basic assembly line, dividing tasks among smiths to boost output. Vorsk watched, initially skeptical, but as the forges roared with improved efficiency, his stance softened. You speak true, Demon Lord. Our steel is stronger already. By evening, they struck a deal. Zog would provide ongoing food shipments and gold in exchange for weapons and scouting support. The Kobolds of Emberclaw would become loyal allies, integrated into his supply network. Morale in the village spiked as Zog promised profit sharing from any future trades involving their steel. As they sealed the pact with a shared meal of roasted fungus and grilled meat, Sisk leaned close to Zog. Lord, there is more. The human army, their leader. I hesitated to say earlier, but you should know. Zog set down his bowl. Go on. Sisk's voice dropped to a whisper. They are led by Sir Alistair, the Dawnbreaker. A legendary champion. He has crushed demon lords before, dozens, they say. His sword is blessed, his armor enchanted. He does not just fight, he obliterates. And he is mere weeks away. The air in the tent seemed to chill. Zog's network flashed a warning, threat level critical. He felt a familiar knot in his stomach, the same feeling before a high-stakes board meeting. But here, the stakes were literal survival. He looked at Vorsk, who had overheard. The Kobold chieftain's expression was grim. Alistair. I have heard tales. He burned a troll enclave to ash last season. No logistics can stop such power. Zog stood, his mind already racing with calculations. The network projected timelines, resource allocations, contingency plans. Maybe not, he said slowly. But we don't need to stop him. We need to outlast him. And now, with your forges and my farms, we have the means. He turned to the gathered kobolds and goblins, their faces lit by forge fire. We expand. We optimize. We build a network so strong that not even a legendary champion can break it. Prepare the first shipment of steel. We have work to do. As they dispersed, Zog stared into the flames, the name Dawnbreaker echoing in his thoughts. The cliff's edge was closer than ever, but for the first time, he had more than just imps and fungus. He had allies, data, and a plan. And in the world of logistics, that was everything. The morning mist clung to the jagged peaks of the Black Spine Mountains like a tattered shroud, and Zog stood atop the newly constructed watchtower of Fort Stonefang, his clawed hands gripping the rough-hewn timber rail. Below him, the valley unfolded a tapestry of dark pine forests and winding game trails that now served as his kingdom's first line of defense. His Tactical Oversight Network hummed in his mind, a constant stream of data overlaying his vision with glowing metrics, supply routes marked in green, resource depots pulsing amber, and the faint red blips of distant human patrols. Efficiency at 87%, Zog muttered to himself, his voice a low rasp that carried the faint echo of his former corporate life. He adjusted the simple leather jerkin he wore, no demonic armor for him, just practical gear that allowed for quick movement. The network's interface showed the fort's stats in crisp detail, food reserves at 92%, weapon stockpiles at 88%, morale holding steady at 78%. Not perfect, but for a structure built in under 2 weeks by unionized goblins working triple shifts with profit-sharing incentives, it was nothing short of miraculous. Behind him, the fort bustled with activity. Goblins scurried along the parapets, their green skin slick with morning dew as they checked ballistae and stacked crates of fungal-tipped arrows. The air smelled of damp earth, pine resin, and the faint, ever-present tang of the optimized fungus farms that now dotted the hinterlands. Zog's network had dictated every aspect of Fort Stonefang's design: strategic placement to control the valley's narrowest choke point, reinforced walls with interlocking timber frames for maximum durability per resource unit, and a centralized courtyard where supply wagons could unload without bottlenecking. Lord Zog, a voice called from below. Zog glanced down to see Grubnik, the goblin foreman he'd promoted just days ago, scrambling up the ladder with surprising agility. The goblin's eyes gleamed with a mix of exhaustion and fervor, a look Zog recognized from his old days of crunch-time project deadlines. The last shipment from the Emberclaw Kobolds just arrived. 10 wagons of forged iron ingots, right on schedule. The boys are already sorting them for the smiths. Zog allowed himself a thin smile. The trade deal with the Kobold village was paying dividends faster than he'd projected. Good. Ensure the Kobold drivers get their bonus rations as per the union contract. And double-check the inventory against the network's real-time tally. I don't want any discrepancies. Grubnik nodded eagerly, pulling a crude slate from his belt to jot notes with a piece of chalk. Yes, sir. Morale's up another 5 points since the profit-sharing announcement. The lads are already calculating their cuts from the last supply raid. That raid had been a small but significant victory. A group of unionized goblins, acting on Zog's network data, had ambushed a human scout patrol and hijacked their wagon loaded with salted meat and hardtack. No spells, no grand battles, just efficient ambush tactics and a well-timed net trap. The goblins had returned cheering, their pockets jingling with bonus coins, and Zog's network had recorded a 15% spike in overall production efficiency across the territory. But as Zog turned back to the valley, his network pinged a soft alert. A cluster of red blips had appeared on the edge of his sensor range, moving steadily toward the fort. He zoomed in mentally, the data resolving into details: 20 human figures, lightly armored, moving with the cautious precision of scouts. They were still a mile out, hidden by the tree line, but his network's predictive algorithms estimated their arrival at the fort's outer perimeter within the hour. Grubnik, Zog said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. Alert the defense teams. We have incoming hostiles, scout party, 20 strong. Activate Protocol Sigma. The goblin's eyes widened, but he didn't hesitate. Sigma, yes sir. I'll rally the squads. He scurried back down the ladder, his shout soon echoing through the fort as goblins dropped their tools and scrambled to pre-assigned positions. Zog took a deep breath, the cool mountain air filling his lungs. This was it, the first real test of his logistical empire. He'd spent weeks optimizing supply chains, unionizing monsters, and building forts, but now the abstract numbers on his network interface were about to collide with the messy reality of steel and blood. His heart hammered against his ribs, a primal fear he hadn't felt since his first day in this body, but he pushed it down, focusing on the data stream. Morale among the goblin defenders flickered, dipping to 75%, then stabilizing as Grubnik's voice rang out with promises of extra shares for every enemy repelled. Down in the courtyard, the fort's gates swung shut with a resonant thud. Goblins manned the ballistae, their small hands deftly loading heavy bolts tipped with fungal toxins harvested from the optimized farms. Others took positions along the walls, clutching spears and crossbows. Zog's network highlighted each defender with a tiny status icon: health, stamina, combat readiness. He could see the tension in their postures, the way their eyes darted toward the tree line, but he could also see the determination, the same drive that had once made his corporate teams meet impossible quarterly targets. From his vantage point, Zog watched as the human scouts emerged from the forest. They moved in a loose formation, their steel helmets glinting in the weak morning sun. They wore the colors of the Dawnbreaker's vanguard, silver and blue tabards over chainmail, each man carrying a sword and shield. Their leader, a grizzled veteran with a scar across his cheek, held up a hand, signaling a halt just outside arrow range. He surveyed the fort with a practiced eye, and Zog could almost hear his thoughts: a Demon Lord's outpost, probably manned by cowardly imps or mindless beasts. An easy target for a quick raid to test defenses. The veteran barked an order, and the scouts spread out, advancing at a jog toward the fort's walls. Zog's network tracked their movements, calculating trajectories and vulnerabilities. He didn't need to shout commands. Every goblin in the fort had been drilled on Protocol Sigma, a defense plan optimized for minimal resource expenditure and maximum deterrent effect. As the humans closed to within 50 yards, the first ballista bolt whistled through the air. It wasn't aimed to kill. Zog's network had calculated a warning shot, striking the ground just ahead of the lead scout and spraying dirt and pebbles. The humans faltered, their formation tightening. The veteran scowled, shouting something lost to the distance, and gestured forward. They charged, shields raised. Now, Zog whispered, and the fort's defenders sprang into action. Goblins on the walls loosed a volley of crossbow bolts, not at the humans directly, but at pre-marked patches of ground where Zog's network had identified unstable terrain. The bolts struck with dull thuds, triggering hidden pit traps lined with sharpened stakes and more of the toxic fungi. 2 scouts stumbled into the pits with startled cries, their legs snared. Others tripped over concealed tripwires that released swinging logs from the trees, knocking them off their feet. The veteran, enraged, rallied his men. "It's just goblins. Push through." He led a direct assault on the gate, his sword gleaming. But as they reached the heavy timber doors, Grubnik's voice rang out from above. "Profit-sharing bonus activated. Double shares for holding the line." The goblins on the walls cheered, a ragged but fierce sound, and their next volley was deadly accurate. Bolts peppered the human ranks, not with overwhelming force, but with precise shots at gaps in their armor, knees, shoulders, necks. The fungal toxins did the rest, causing spasms and disorientation. The veteran took a bolt to the thigh, stumbling back with a curse. Zog watched, his network updating in real time. Enemy morale was plummeting, their cohesion breaking as they realized this wasn't the disorganized rabble they'd expected. His goblins, motivated by tangible rewards and the pride of their union, fought with a discipline that bordered on fanaticism. They rotated positions smoothly, fresh defenders replacing tired ones without a break in the defense, all coordinated by Zog's mental commands relayed through Grubnik. Within minutes, the human scouts were in retreat, dragging their wounded as they fled back into the forest. The veteran cast one last, bewildered look at the fort, at the goblins now cheering and counting imaginary coins, before disappearing into the trees. Zog's network pinged a summary: 0 goblin casualties, minimal resource expenditure, 3 ballista bolts, 20 crossbow bolts, 2 triggered traps, and a 10% morale boost across the fort. Enemy losses: for incapacitated, 6 lightly wounded, full retreat. As the gates creaked open to allow cleanup crews to reset the traps, Zog descended the watchtower, his mind already racing ahead. The skirmish had been a success, but his network was flashing a new alert. While the scouts had been attacking, his sensors had detected a much larger vulnerability: the human army's supply wagons, lumbering along a poorly guarded road a day's march to the south. The data stream showed them loaded with food, weapons, and siege equipment, moving at a sluggish pace due to inefficient oxen teams and muddy tracks. Zog found Grubnik in the courtyard, the goblin beaming as he tallied up the defense bonuses on his slate. "Lord Zog. Did you see? We crushed M. The lads are already asking when the next raid is." "Soon," Zog said, his eyes distant as he interfaced with the network. He pulled up a map display, highlighting the supply wagon route. "But we're shifting tactics. The scouts were just a probe. The real weakness is here." He pointed a clawed finger at the glowing line on the mental map. "The human supply line. It's vulnerable, overextended, and ripe for disruption." Grubnik's grin widened. "Hijack operation?" "The Kobolds have been itching for some action since they joined up." Zog nodded. "Exactly. Summon Krieg from Emberclaw. Tell him I have a priority mission for his best scouts. We're going to start hitting those wagons, not to destroy them, but to capture them. Every wagon we take weakens Alistair's army and strengthens our own reserves. And with the profit-sharing model, every kobold involved gets a cut of the spoils." Within the hour, Krieg, the grizzled kobold chieftain with scales the color of tarnished copper, stood before Zog in the fort's command tent. The Kobold's eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the map Zog had sketched on parchment based on network data. The Dawnbreaker's supply route, Krieg rasped, his voice like grinding stones. My scouts have watched it. They guard it lightly. Arrogant humans think no one would dare strike so deep. They're about to learn otherwise, Zog said. He detailed the plan. Small, mobile teams of kobolds, using their natural stealth and knowledge of the terrain, would ambush the wagons at night, disable the guards with non-lethal traps. Zog's network emphasized capture over kill for morale and intelligence purposes, and drive the wagons back to pre-designated drop points. From there, unionized goblin teams would redistribute the supplies to the border forts. Efficiency is key. Minimal risk, maximum gain. Your people will receive a 15% share of all captured goods, plus bonuses for speed and stealth. Krieg's tail twitched in approval. The kobolds of Emberclaw are with you, Lord Zog. We'll have the first wagons by dawn tomorrow. He saluted, a crisp gesture he'd picked up from watching the goblins, and slipped out of the tent to rally his teams. As dusk settled over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange, Zog stood once more on the watchtower. His network showed the kobold teams moving out, their icons blinking as they vanished into the forest. The first hijack operation was underway, a silent, surgical strike against the very logistics that fueled the human war machine. Below, the fort hummed with renewed energy, goblins celebrating their victory with extra rations and boisterous songs about profit shares. But as the last light faded, Zog's network pinged again, this time, a urgent, pulsing alert that drowned out all other data. He zoomed out on the mental map, and his breath caught in his throat. From the south, a massive wave of red icons was advancing, moving with the grim purpose of a seasoned army. The network's estimates scrolled across his vision, over 1,000 soldiers, heavy cavalry, siege engines, and at their head, a single, blazing gold icon marked Sir Alistair the Dawnbreaker, Vanguard. They were still a day away, but their speed was alarming. And as Zog calculated the numbers, a cold knot tightened in his stomach. Fort Stonefang, for all its efficiency, held only 100 goblin defenders. Even with the other border forts, his total forces numbered maybe 300 against Alistair's 1,000. 10-to-1 odds, just as the network had warned in its initial projections. Zog gripped the rail until the wood creaked. The kobold hijackings might slow the human advance, but they wouldn't stop it. The first real battle was coming, and it would be a test not just of logistics, but of sheer survival. He stared into the gathering darkness, the data streams flickering before his eyes, and whispered to the empty air, time to optimize for war. The morning sun rose over Fort Stonefang like a blood orange, casting long shadows from the crude wooden palisades. Zog stood on the command platform, a hastily constructed wooden structure overlooking the fort's central courtyard, his clawed hands gripping the railing. His Tactical Oversight Network hummed in his mind, a constant stream of data overlaying his vision in translucent blue text. Morale, 78%. Food reserves, 42% and dropping. Weapon stockpiles, 65%. Enemy forces detected, 1,200 humans, 300 meters northeast, advancing. Sir Alistair's vanguard, Zog thought, his goblin-like features tightening. The legendary champion's army had arrived overnight, their campfires dotting the plains like fallen stars. Through his network, he could see their formation, knights in gleaming plate armor at the front, archers in the rear, and 3 massive siege engines being wheeled into position, 2 catapults and a battering ram. The data scrolled, siege engine number 1, catapult weak point identified axle joint, stress fracture probability 89%. Siege engine number 2, catapult rope tension suboptimal, efficiency reduced by 23%. Siege engine number 3, battering ram wood moisture content high, vulnerability to fire attacks. Zog's 3 imps, Grick, Snarl, and Blip scurried around his feet, their tiny wings fluttering nervously. Master Zog, the goblins are ready, Grick squeaked, pointing a bony finger toward the walls. Zog glanced down. His unionized goblins, armed with spears and shields forged from hijacked human iron, stood in ragged lines along the ramparts. Their green faces were set in determined grimaces, not the usual expressions of fear he'd seen when he first arrived in this world. Profit-sharing bonuses flashed in his network, plus 5 morale points per successful defense action. Good, Zog said, his voice a low rumble. Tell them to hold positions. And get the Kobold teams ready, I want those supply lines hit before noon. As Grick scampered off, Zog focused on the network's real-time feed. The human army was moving, their commander a tall figure in silver armor atop a white horse raising a sword. Sir Alistair. Zog's network tagged him with a red icon, threat level, high. Combat efficiency, 92%. Morale influence, plus 30% to allied units. Zog felt a flicker of the old corporate anxiety, the kind that came before a major quarterly report. But he pushed it down. This wasn't about magic or brute force, it was about logistics. Snarl, bring me the resource allocation chart, Zog ordered. The imp produced a scroll, and Zog unrolled it, his eyes darting over the numbers. Food consumption rates were spiking as goblins ate pre-battle rations. Weapon durability was dropping from constant drills. His network projected, Fort Stonefawn will deplete critical resources within 48 hours if siege continues at current intensity. We need to buy time, Zog muttered. He tapped into the network's communication node, a mental link he'd established with key leaders. Kobold Team Alpha, report. A voice crackled in his mind, tinny and eager. Chief Zog. This is Grishnak. We're in position near the human supply route, 3 kilometers east. 2 wagons spotted, lightly guarded. Permission to engage? Zog smiled, a rare expression that stretched his leathery lips. Granted. Remember the bonus structure, 10% of hijacked resources goes to your team's profit-sharing pool. And target the axles, slow them down. Understood. For the Union. Grishnak's mental signal cut off. Outside the fort, the first catapult launched. A massive stone arced through the air, trailing dust. Zog's network calculated its trajectory in real time, impact point, northwest wall, section 7. Structural integrity, 45%. Goblins, take cover. Zog shouted, his voice amplified by a crude megaphone one of the imps had fashioned from a hollowed log. The goblins ducked as the stone slammed into the wall with a thunderous crash. Wood splintered, but the palisade held, barely. Damage report, northwest wall integrity now 32%. Repair materials required, 50 units of timber, 20 units of iron nails. Zog's mind raced. He accessed the supply chain data. Timber reserves, 120 units, stored in the fort's warehouse. Iron nails, 15 units, critical shortage. Blip, send a message to the Kobolds, priority hijack target any wagon carrying metal goods. And tell the goblin repair crew to start work on the wall, but conserve nails. As Blip fluttered away, Zog turned his attention back to the siege. The humans were advancing, archers loosing volleys of arrows. His network tracked each projectile, highlighting safe zones. Shields up, he commanded. The goblins raised their scavenged shields, and arrows thudded into wood and earth. A few goblins cried out, but the network showed only minor injuries. Morale dipped slightly to 75%, then stabilized as profit-sharing alerts pinged, +2 morale for successful defense. Sir Alistair rode forward, his voice booming across the field. Demon Lord Zog. Surrender now, and I will grant your monsters merciful deaths. Resist, and we will grind your fort to dust. Zog leaned over the railing, his network feeding him atmospheric data, wind speed, humidity, even the slight tremor in Alistair's horse's legs from fatigue. Sir Alistair, he called back, his tone calm, almost conversational. I've analyzed your supply lines. Your food reserves are at 60%, but your water wagons are lagging 2 hours behind. Your soldiers will be thirsty by midday. Why not discuss a trade agreement instead? A ripple of confusion went through the human ranks. Alistair's face, visible through his helmet's visor, tightened in anger. Enough tricks. Attack. The battering ram began its advance, dozens of soldiers pushing it toward the main gate. Zog's network highlighted its weakness, the moist wood. Goblin fire teams, ready, he ordered. A group of goblins scrambled to the walls, clutching pots of flammable fungus oil, a byproduct of Zog's optimized farms. As the ram drew closer, Zog waited, his network counting down the distance. 50 meters. 30 meters. 10 meters. Now! The goblins hurled the pots. They shattered against the ram, drenching it in oily liquid. A follow-up volley of torches set it ablaze. Flames licked up the wood, and the humans stumbled back, coughing smoke. Siege engine number 3 status, destroyed. Enemy morale, minus 10%. But the victory was short-lived. The catapults fired again, this time aiming for the courtyard. One stone crashed through a storage shed, destroying 20 units of food reserves. Food reserves now, 35%. Zog gritted his teeth. Kobold teams, status update. Grishnak's voice returned, breathless. Chief. 2 wagons captured. We got iron ingots and grain. But the humans are reinforcing their convoy, more guards coming. Good work, Zog said. Divert the grain to the fort immediately. And have Team Beta target the catapult supply wagons, look for rope and timber. As the day wore on, the siege settled into a grim rhythm. The humans pounded the walls with catapults, while Zog's goblins repelled scaling attempts with spears and boiling water. His network was a constant buzz of information, morale fluctuated between 70% and 80%, buoyed by bonus alerts every time a wagon was hijacked. Resource depletion, however, was the real enemy. By afternoon, food reserves hit 25%, and the nail shortage was crippling repairs. Zog retreated to his command tent, a patched canvas shelter in the courtyard, to review the data. Snarl brought him a bowl of fungus stew, but he barely tasted it. His mind was on the numbers. We're running on fumes, he murmured to himself. The network projected, if current attrition continues, fort will fall within 24 hours. But then, a new alert pinged. Kobold Team Gamma reports unusual activity, human scouts meeting with a kobold in the eastern woods. Coordinates logged. Zog froze. His network zoomed in on the data stream. It was a brief transmission, but clear. A kobold identity unknown was exchanging information with human agents. The network flagged it with a red warning, potential security breach. Traitor detected among kobold ranks. A cold knot formed in Zog's stomach. He thought of the kobolds' eager faces, their profit-sharing bonuses, their loyalty sworn over trade deals. Who would betray that? And why? His network began cross-referencing data, kobold morale stats, resource access logs, recent behavior patterns. But before it could isolate a suspect, another alert blared. Sir Alistair is mobilizing for a night assault. Estimated time, 2 hours. Zog stood up, his claws digging into the wooden table. Grick, summon the Kobold Chieftain and the Goblin Union reps now. Within minutes, the tent was crowded. Grishnak, the Kobold leader, stood panting, his scales dusty from the hijack missions. Beside him, Borg, the head Goblin Union representative, folded his arms, his expression grim. We have a problem, Zog said, his voice low. The fort's resources are critical. Food is below 20%, and we're out of nails. But worse, there's a traitor among us. Someone's leaking our plans to the humans. Grishnak's eyes widened. Impossible. My kobolds are loyal. The profit sharing. I have data, Zog interrupted, tapping his temple. A meeting in the eastern woods. One of yours. The kobold chieftain bristled, but before he could protest, Borg spoke up. Doesn't matter who. What's the plan, Chief? We can't hold much longer. Zog paced, his network running scenarios. We need to sabotage their siege engines completely. Grishnak, take your best team and hit the catapults, use the weakness data I'm sending you. Axle joints, rope tension. Borg, mobilize all goblins for a full defense. I'm authorizing double bonuses for the next 6 hours. As they nodded and hurried out, Zog stared at the network's traitor alert. It pulsed like a heartbeat. He couldn't confront it now, not with Alistair's night assault looming. But the knowledge ate at him. Who was it? And what had they revealed? Outside, dusk settled, painting the sky in purples and oranges. The human campfires glowed brighter, and the sounds of preparation echoed across the plain. Zog climbed back to the command platform. His network showed the Goblins' morale at 72%, holding steady thanks to the bonus announcements. But the resource numbers were a stark red: food, 18%. Weapons, 40%. Timber, 5 units. Then, a new transmission from Grishnak, catapult number 1 disabled. Axle shattered. But we lost 2 kobolds to guards. And Chief, I saw something. One of my scouts didn't report back. His name is Crick. He was acting strange lately. Zog's network immediately tagged Crick, Kobold Scout, last seen near Eastern Woods. Morale stats showed unexplained dips. Probability of traitor, 85%. The cliffhanger loomed in Zog's mind, a traitor among them, and the night assault mere hours away. As he watched the Human Torches move into formation, his network pinged with a final, grim projection: without intervention, Fort Stonefawn will fall by dawn. And somewhere in the shadows, a kobold was selling their secrets for gold. The night was a shroud of tension over Fort Stonefawn, pierced only by the distant glow of human campfires and the occasional creak of siege engines being repositioned. Zog stood in the command chamber, a repurposed storeroom now filled with glowing data streams from his Tactical Oversight Network. The holographic display flickered with red warnings: food reserves at 18%, nail inventory critical, morale holding at 65% only because of the profit-sharing bonuses paid out for every hijacked wagon. But one alert pulsed more urgently than the others: the traitor detection algorithm had pinpointed its target. Crick the Kobold. Scout leader, recently promoted for his efficiency in mapping enemy supply routes. Zog's goblin-like fingers traced the data trail: encrypted messages sent during night watches, resource movements leaked before they happened, a sudden spike in personal wealth not accounted for by bonuses. The network estimated 94% probability of betrayal. Crack, Zog called, his voice calm despite the storm in his mind. The imp lieutenant scurried in, his green skin slick with sweat from overseeing wall repairs. Bring Crick here. Alone. And double the guard on the western supply tunnel, quietly. Crack nodded, his beady eyes widening at the order. As he left, Zog studied the siege layout on his mental interface. Sir Alistair's forces had pulled back slightly after the failed night assault, but their catapults were being reloaded with flaming pitch. The champion was methodical, patient, and according to the leaked data, receiving real-time updates on Fort Stonefang's weaknesses. Zog's corporate instincts kicked in: every conflict had leverage points, and information was the ultimate currency. Minutes later, Crick entered the chamber. The kobold was taller than most of his kind, with scales the color of tarnished copper and intelligent yellow eyes that darted around the room. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed he was indispensable. You summoned me, Lord Zog? Crick's voice was smooth, almost respectful. But the network's micro-expression analysis flagged subtle tension in his jawline. Zog didn't look up from the data streams. The western tunnel guard rotation was changed 3 hours ago. Yet the humans attempted a flanking maneuver there exactly at shift change. Explain. A flicker of panic crossed Crick's face, quickly masked. Coincidence, my lord. Their scouts are thorough. Their scouts are dead, Zog said flatly, finally meeting the kobold's gaze. Your team eliminated them yesterday. Which means someone inside this fort is feeding them information. He gestured to the hologram, where Crick's financial records glowed accusingly. You've received 3 payments of human gold in the last week. Delivered via carrier pigeon to a dead drop north of the fort. Crick's scales seemed to pale. He took a step back, hands twitching toward the dagger at his belt. I can explain. You will, Zog said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. But first, tell me who's paying you. And why? The kobold's shoulders slumped, the defiance draining away. He sank onto a crate, his tail curling around his feet. It's not just gold, Lord Zog. They have my clutch sister. Captured during a scouting mission last month. The humans threatened to execute her if I didn't cooperate. Zog's network cross-referenced the claim. Yes, a kobold scout named Lyra had been reported missing 4 weeks prior. The data matched. But there was more. Crick's payments exceeded simple ransom amounts. Continue. They're not just any humans, Crick whispered, leaning forward. Nobles. From the Eastern Kingdoms. Lord Brant and his consortium. They're funding Sir Alistair's campaign, but they don't want a quick victory. They want the war to drag on. Why? Zog's mind was already racing, connecting dots. The network pulled up economic data. Dungeon core prices had tripled since the conflict began, weapons contracts were at an all-time high, and supply shipments to the front lines were invoiced at inflated rates. Profit, Crick spat the word like poison. Every week this siege continues, their companies earn another fortune. They monopolize dungeon core mining in safe territories, then sell them to the kingdom at markup. They own the armories, the grain silos, the transport guilds. Peace would bankrupt them. Zog felt a cold clarity settle over him. This wasn't about demons versus heroes, it was a racket. A corporate takeover disguised as a holy war. His former life as an analyst had prepared him for this exact kind of graft. What did they promise you? My sister's freedom, and a cut of the spoils, Crick admitted, shame coloring his voice. They said once the fort fell, they'd appoint me as overseer of kobold labor in the occupied territories. A puppet ruler. Silence hung in the chamber, broken only by the distant thud of a catapult testing its range. Zog studied the kobold. The network's loyalty metrics showed Crick was conflicted fear for his sister warring with guilt over betrayal. Leverage, Zog thought. Every problem is a negotiation. I could have you executed, Zog said quietly. Or thrown to the goblins for stealing their bonus shares. But that wouldn't save your sister, and it wouldn't stop the leak. He paused, letting the threat sink in. Instead, you're going to help me turn their greed against them. Crick looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. How? You'll keep sending messages, Zog explained, pulling up a false data set on his interface. But from now on, I control what you send. We'll feed them misinformation, exaggerated resource shortages, fake mutiny plots, incorrect guard schedules. Meanwhile, we use your contact chain to learn their real movements. They'll suspect something if the information stops being accurate, Crick warned. We'll make it accurate enough to be believable, but flawed in key details, Zog said, his fingers dancing over the hologram as he crafted a deceptive report. For example, tell them our food reserves are at 10% and morale is collapsing. In reality, we're at 18% and holding. That might prompt them to tighten the siege, thinking we're desperate. But we'll have just received a hijacked grain shipment through the Eastern Ravine. Crick's eyes widened as he understood the plan. You want to manipulate their strategy. I want to bankrupt them, Zog corrected. Every decision they make based on false data will waste their resources. And while they're chasing ghosts, we'll be strengthening our position. He leaned closer, his gaze intense. But I need your full commitment. No more side deals. My sister. We'll rescue her, Zog interrupted. My network already has her location, a guarded villa behind enemy lines. Once we've destabilized their supply chain, we'll extract her during the confusion. He activated a new protocol on his interface. And to ensure your loyalty, I'm increasing kobold profit sharing by 15% effective immediately. Your people will earn more from hijacking wagons than they ever could from human bribes. The network displayed the change. Kobold morale projections jumped from 60% to 85%. Crick stared at the numbers, then at Zog. For the first time, real respect entered his expression. You're not like other demon lords. I'm not a demon lord at all, Zog said wryly. I'm a logistics manager with a territory to run. Now, send this first message. He handed Crick a sealed scroll containing carefully crafted lies about the fort's nail shortage and weakening western defenses. As Crick left to dispatch the message via his usual pigeon, Zog turned his attention to the larger battlefield. The network showed Sir Alistair's camp stirring, preparations for a dawn assault were underway. But now, with the traitor-turned-asset, Zog had a new advantage. He called Grack back in. Redirect all available resources to the Eastern Ravine supply line, Zog ordered. The humans think we're starving, so they'll focus on the main gates. We'll use the ravine to bring in the hijacked wagons from yesterday's operation. And double the bonuses for any kobold who intercepts human communication birds. I want to monitor their reactions to our false data." Grak saluted, his earlier anxiety replaced by determination. As he hurried out, Zog allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The pieces were moving on the board. But the siege was intensifying outside. The catapults began launching fireballs in earnest, lighting up the night sky with arcs of flame. Zog stepped out onto the fort's inner rampart. The air smelled of smoke and damp stone. Below, goblin crews scrambled to douse fires, their movements coordinated by real-time directives from his network. He watched as a team used efficiently organized water buckets, exactly 7 per station, refilled on a rotating schedule, to extinguish a blaze near the granary. Morale ticked up another point. Then the network pinged an alert. Crick's message had been received. Human scouts were now mobilizing toward the western sector, exactly as the false data had suggested. Zog allowed himself a thin smile. Phase 1 was underway. But the cost was mounting. A flaming projectile struck the northern tower, sending rubble crashing down. The network flashed a damage report, structural integrity at 72% and falling. Zog issued rapid commands: redirect repair crews, prioritize load-bearing walls, use hijacked timber from the last wagon raid. The goblins responded with surprising efficiency, their union training kicking in. They worked in shifts, with rest periods calculated to maximize productivity, and every saved section of wall earned them bonus shares. As dawn approached, the sky lightened to a bruised purple. Sir Alistair's forces assembled in formation, rows of armored soldiers, archers, and siege engines. The champion himself rode before them, his silver armor gleaming in the first rays of sun. Through a spyglass, Zog saw the man's face, stern, unwavering, a true believer in his cause. Unaware that his patrons were prolonging the war for profit. The network analyzed the enemy deployment, full-scale assault imminent. Estimated time to breach, 4 hours if defenses held, 2 if they didn't. Zog's mind raced through contingencies. He had bought time with the misinformation, but now came the real test. He gathered his commanders in the courtyard: Grak, Crick, now under close watch, and Borga the Goblin Union representative. Their faces were grim but focused. "They're coming at dawn," Zog said, his voice carrying over the growing rumble of enemy drums. "But we've weakened their intelligence. They'll hit the west wall hardest, expecting collapse. Instead, we've reinforced it with the timber from the hijacked wagons. Their main force will be funneled into the killing zone between towers 3 and 4. Borga grinned, showing sharp teeth. "My lads are ready. Bonus shares for every human turned back, double for siege engines disabled." Crick, Zog turned to the kobold. "Your scouts will harass their rear lines, target the supply carts carrying their reserve arrows and water. Slow them down, make them thirsty." Crick nodded, his earlier treachery replaced by a fierce loyalty born of Zog's promise to rescue his sister. "It will be done." As they dispersed, Zog returned to his command chamber. The network displayed real-time data. Food reserves had crept up to 22% thanks to the ravine shipment, morale was at 70% and climbing with the increased profit sharing, and the false data stream was causing visible confusion in the human ranks. Their vanguard was indeed shifting toward the fortified west wall. But the cost was there too. Goblin casualties from the night's fires, 12 injured, 3 dead. Resource depletion rates were still unsustainable if the siege lasted another week. And Sir Alistair was not a fool, he would adapt. Zog watched through a slit window as the first wave of human soldiers advanced, shields raised against arrow fire. The goblin archers, coordinated by network targeting algorithms, loosed volleys with chilling precision. But there were too many. The humans reached the walls, ladders slamming against stone. The battle joined in earnest. Zog's interface became a storm of data, damage reports, morale fluctuations, resource alerts. He issued commands like a conductor: redirect reserves here, reinforce that sector, offer triple bonuses for holding the gatehouse. The unionized goblins fought with a ferocity born of economic incentive, their green bodies swarming over the battlements to push back ladders. 4 hours, the fort held. The west wall, supposedly weakened, stood firm under the reinforced timber. The humans, confused by their faulty intelligence, wasted energy on secondary assaults that went nowhere. But their numbers told. Slowly, inexorably, they gained footholds. As the sun climbed toward noon, a runner burst into the chamber, a young goblin with a bleeding arm. Lord Zog. The south gate, they've brought up the battering ram again. The hinges are buckling. Zog checked the network. True enough, structural integrity at the south gate was down to 30%. He had reserves, a cache of metal plates hijacked from a human smithy wagon, but deploying them would leave other sectors vulnerable. He made the calculation in seconds. Send the plates, he ordered. And tell Borga to prepare a countercharge. If the gate falls, we funnel him into the inner courtyard and hit them with boiling oil from the hijacked kitchen supplies. The goblin raced off. Zog turned back to the window. Sir Alistair was now at the forefront, his sword cutting down goblins with practiced ease. The champion's face was set in a grimace of determination. He raised his blade, pointing directly at the command chamber. And then, as the battering ram thudded against the south gate with renewed force, a messenger kobold scurried in, panting. Lord Zog. A message from the enemy camp delivered by arrow. Zog took the scroll. The handwriting was elegant, the seal that of Sir Alistair. He broke it open, his eyes scanning the brief text. It was not a demand for surrender, nor a threat. It was a single sentence, cold and final. Dawn tomorrow, I will personally lead the final assault. Prepare to meet your end, demon. Zog crumpled the scroll. Outside, the south gate groaned under the ram's impact. The network showed morale dipping as goblins sensed the turning tide. But Zog's mind was already racing ahead. Tomorrow's assault would be the climax. And he had one night to turn deception into victory. He activated a full system diagnostic, the holograms bathing the chamber in blue light. Food, 20%. Morale, 65%. Loyalty of turn trader, 88% and rising. False data stream, active and misleading. Hijacked supplies en route, 2 wagons of weapons, 1 of medical supplies. Crack! Zog shouted. The imp appeared instantly. Recall all hijacking teams. I want every resource we have inside these walls by midnight. And bring Crick to me, we have one more message to send. As the fort shook under another ram impact, Zog began crafting the ultimate piece of misinformation. One that would make Sir Alistair commit everything to the wrong place at the wrong time. The war for profit was about to become a war of attrition, and Zog's logistics were just getting started. Dawn broke over Fort Stonefawn with a bloody hue, painting the eastern sky in shades of crimson and gold. Zog stood on the command platform, his goblin-like form silhouetted against the growing light. The Tactical Oversight Network hummed in his mind, a constant stream of data overlaying his vision, morale at 78%, resource reserves at 42%, defense integrity at 91%. But the numbers were dropping even as he watched. Below, the human army stirred. Sir Alistair's forces had spent the night assembling siege towers and battering rams, their campfires dotting the valley like fallen stars. Now, as the first rays of sun touched the fort's stone walls, trumpets blared a harsh, metallic sound that echoed off the mountains. The assault had begun. Zog's 3 imps, Grick, Snarl, and Twitch huddled at his feet, their eyes wide with fear. Boss, Grick squeaked, pointing at trembling finger. They're moving the big one. Zog followed his gaze. A massive siege tower, 3 stories tall and mounted on iron-rimmed wheels, was being pushed toward the northern wall. The Tactical Oversight Network immediately highlighted its weak points: the wooden axles, stress level, 89%, the leather hinges on the drawbridge, durability, 43%, the morale of the soldiers pushing it, wavering at 65%. But there were too many of them, hundreds of armored figures swarming behind the tower like ants. Redirect all fungal toxin reserves to the northern wall, Zog commanded, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. In his previous life as Tanaka, he'd faced boardroom battles and quarterly reports that felt like life or death struggles. But this was different. The stakes were literal. Snarl scurried off to relay the order, his small form darting between goblin archers who were already knocking arrows. The unionized goblins of Fort Stonefang stood their ground, their green faces set in determined lines. Zog's merit-based promotion system meant every kill earned bonus shares in the fort's resource pool. He could see the calculation in their eyes, not just survival, but profit. "First wave incoming," shouted Grub, the goblin foreman Zog had promoted to wall commander. His voice carried over the growing roar of the approaching army. Arrows darkened the sky, a black cloud descending toward the fort. The Tactical Oversight Network tracked their trajectory, calculating impact zones. Zog didn't flinch as shafts thudded into the wooden palisade around him. One arrow embedded itself in the platform railing, vibrating with the force of its flight. "Shields!" Grub bellowed, and goblins raised scavenged human bucklers and makeshift barriers of woven fungus fibers. The siege tower reached the wall with a grinding crash that shook the very stones beneath Zog's feet. The drawbridge slammed down, and armored knights poured onto the battlements. Steel met crude iron as goblin defenders rushed to meet them. Zog's network flashed red alerts. Defense integrity, 74% and falling. Northern Wall Section 3, breached. Southern Gate, under heavy battering ram assault. Resource allocation, inefficient, too many toxins concentrated in areas with minimal enemy pressure. "Twitch," Zog said, his eyes never leaving the data stream. "Tell the Kobold teams to release the slurry from Reservoir 2. Target the siege tower's wheels." The imp nodded frantically and scampered down a ladder, nearly tripping over his own tail in his haste. On the wall, the battle raged. A human knight in gleaming plate armor cut down two goblins with sweeping blows of his broadsword. But as he raised his weapon for a third strike, a smaller goblin, barely chest-high to the human, darted between his legs and jammed a poisoned dagger into the gap at his knee joint. The knight screamed, a sound of pure agony as the fungal toxin took effect. His leg buckled, and he tumbled from the wall to the stones below. The goblin who'd made the kill Zog's network identified him as Nub, a former dung collector promoted to assault team leader, let out a triumphant shriek. "That's 5 shares," he yelled to his comrades. "My litter gets extra rations this week." Morale ticked upward, 79%. But the breach was widening. More knights swarmed over the drawbridge, their formation tight and disciplined. Zog's goblins fought with ferocity born of desperation and economic incentive, but they were being pushed back, step by bloody step. Then the southern gate shuddered under a massive impact. The battering ram, a tree trunk capped with iron, slammed into the reinforced wood again. Zog's network showed the gate's integrity at 31% and dropping fast. "Boss!" Grick tugged at Zog's robe. "The Kobold scouts report the hijacked wagons are still 2 hours out. We won't hold that long." Zog closed his eyes for a moment, shutting out the chaos. In the darkness behind his eyelids, the Tactical Oversight Network glowed brighter. He visualized the entire battlefield, the fort, the surrounding terrain, the enemy positions, his own resource flows. The data stream became a river of light, and he dove into it. There. A pattern emerged. Sir Alistair was concentrating his elite troops at the main breaches, but his support lines were stretched thin. The human archers at the rear were running low on arrows, their resupply wagons hadn't arrived from the main camp. The knight's armor showed signs of fatigue maintenance, dulled edges, loose straps. And the siege tower, its momentum had stalled as goblins poured boiling fungus slurry over its wheels, gumming up the mechanisms. Zog's eyes snapped open. "New orders," he said, his voice cutting through the din. "All goblin teams on the northern wall fall back to secondary positions. Let them take the outer battlements." Grick stared at him. "But boss, that's giving up ground." "We're not giving it up," Zog said. "We're selling it at a premium." He pointed to the siege tower. "That thing is a resource sink. It took them a week to build. If we let them think they've won this section, they'll commit more troops to holding it. Then we hit them with everything we've got from the flanks." He turned to Snarl, who had returned panting. "Redirect all remaining toxin to the southern gate area. I want every goblin with a projectile weapon there in 3 minutes. And tell Grub to implement contingency plan Delta." "Delta?" Snarl blinked. "But that's the The profit-sharing double bonus for high-risk actions, yes, Zog finished. Effective immediately. Any goblin who volunteers for the gate defense gets triple shares for the duration of the assault. The effect was instantaneous. As word spread through the fort's communication network, a system of coded fungus glow signals Zog had implemented, goblins began disengaging from the northern wall in an organized retreat. They fell back to inner barricades, dragging wounded comrades with them. The human knights cheered, thinking they'd broken the demonic resistance. But Zog's network showed the truth: defense integrity had stabilized at 41%. The retreat was strategic, not chaotic. And at the southern gate, Grub stood before a hastily assembled force of 50 goblins, all armed with an assortment of weapons: spears tipped with sharpened stone, slings loaded with toxic fungus pods, even cooking pots filled with boiling oil. The goblin foreman's face was smeared with soot and blood, but his eyes burned with determination. "Triple shares," he roared, raising a notched sword. "For every human you drop at the gate. Your litters will eat like kings. Your burrows will have the best fungus. Now who's with me?" A ragged cheer went up. Morale jumped to 82%. The battering ram struck again. This time, the southern gate splintered, one of its massive hinges tearing free from the stone. Daylight poured through the gap, illuminating the desperate faces of the goblin defenders. "Now!" Grub screamed. Goblins surged forward, not to meet the humans head-on, but to attack the battering ram itself. They swarmed over the log, hacking at the ropes that held the iron cap, pouring their remaining toxin reserves into the mechanisms. Human soldiers tried to stop them, but the goblins fought with a frenzy that bordered on madness. This was their bonus round: every injury inflicted, every second of delay earned, translated directly into economic security for their families. Zog watched from the command platform, his network tracking every casualty. Goblins fell, yes, defense integrity dropped to 38%, but they took 3 humans for every one of their own. And they'd stopped the battering ram. The great log lay abandoned just outside the shattered gate, its iron cap dented and its rope severed. But the cost had been high. Grub was down, bleeding from a sword wound to his side. The southern defense force was at half strength. And on the northern wall, human knights were consolidating their position, bringing up reinforcements. Then the network pinged an alert. Zog's breath caught in his throat. The hijacked supply wagons, they'd been delayed by a skirmish with human patrols. Estimated arrival time, 90 minutes. Fort Stonefang wouldn't last 90 minutes. Sir Alistair must have sensed the turning tide. The human champion appeared on the northern battlements, his armor gleaming in the morning sun. He raised his sword, and a cheer went up from his troops. They began forming up for a final push into the fort's interior. Zog's mind raced. He had one card left to play: the false data he'd fed through the traitor Kobold Crick. According to the misinformation, Fort Stonefang's weakest point was the eastern storage cellar, which supposedly held their emergency reserves. In reality, the cellar was a death trap rigged with collapsing supports and fungal spore bombs. But would Sir Alistair take the bait? The champion was no fool. He'd seen Zog's unconventional tactics already. As if answering his thoughts, a detachment of human soldiers broke off from the main force and headed toward the eastern side of the fort. Zog's network identified them as sappers, engineers trained in demolition. They were carrying pickaxes and small barrels of what the network's material analysis suggested was alchemical fire. "They're going for the cellar," Zog murmured. A cold smile touched his lips. "Right on schedule." He turned to his remaining imp. "Grick, signal the eastern team. Let them enter the outer cellar, then seal it behind them." "But boss, what about?" "The supports are rigged to collapse on my command," Zog said. "And the spore bombs will incapacitate anyone who survives the cave-in. It's not a perfect solution, but it'll buy us time." As Grick scurried off to deliver the order, Zog returned his attention to the main battle. The human knights were advancing from the northern wall, pushing deeper into the fort. Goblin defenders fought from behind barricades of overturned carts and stacked crates, but the line was buckling. Defense integrity, 29%. Then the ground shook. Not from the battle, but from something approaching from the west. Zog's network pinged frantically, multiple new contacts, moving fast. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought it was Sir Alistair's reinforcements arriving early. But then he saw them through the network's remote visualization, wagons. Dozens of them, pulled not by horses but by teams of sturdy kobolds and even a few captured draft oxen. The wagons were piled high with crates and barrels, and riding atop them were goblins and kobolds armed with scavenged human weapons. The hijacked supply convoy had arrived. And they weren't alone. Leading the wagons was Crick, the traitor-turned-double agent kobold. He rode on the lead wagon's bench, waving a ragged banner made from a stitched-together collection of human tabards. Beside him stood Borga, the kobold chieftain Zog had negotiated with back in Chapter 4. Borga raised a horn to his lips and blew a deep, resonant note that cut through the battle's noise. Every head turned. Human and goblin alike paused in their fighting to stare at the unexpected arrival. The wagons didn't stop at the fort's perimeter. They crashed right through the weakened southern gate area, scattering the human soldiers trying to regroup there. Kobolds leaped from the wagons, their small forms darting between human legs, slashing at hamstrings with sharpened stones. Goblins followed, howling with renewed vigor. But it was what was in the wagons that changed everything. Zog's network identified the contents in real time: fresh weapons, human-made swords and spears, medical supplies, bandages and healing herbs, food reserves, dried meat and hardtack, and most importantly, barrels of alchemical components that the network immediately flagged as usable for defensive measures. Boss! Snarl reappeared, his eyes wide with excitement. They brought the whole damn supply train. And they hijacked the human commander's personal ale shipment too. Morale skyrocketed, 94%. The human forces faltered. They'd been fighting for hours, expecting to overwhelm a depleted, starving garrison. Instead, they faced a fort suddenly resupplied and reinforced. And from the eastern side of the fort came a muffled boom, followed by clouds of dust. The cellar trap had sprung. Zog's network showed the sapper team's status, neutralized. Sir Alistair stood on the northern wall, his sword lowered. Zog could see the confusion on the champion's face even from a distance. This wasn't how wars were supposed to work. Demons didn't have supply chains. They didn't receive reinforcements in the middle of a siege. They certainly didn't arrive in hijacked human wagons flying patchwork banners. The human knights began falling back, first in ones and twos, then in organized units. They retreated to the northern wall, dragging their wounded with them. The assault was over. Zog let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the command platform's railing. Defense integrity, 35% in holding. Resource reserves, 68% in climbing as the new supplies were unloaded. Casualty reports scrolled through his network: too many goblins lost, but far fewer than he'd feared. As the last human soldier retreated over the wall, a strange silence fell over Fort Stonefang. The only sounds were the moans of the wounded, the crackle of still burning fires, and the cheerful chatter of kobolds unloading wagons. Grub, bandaged and leaning on a spear, limped up to the command platform. "We held, boss," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We actually held." Zog nodded. "Thanks to everyone's efforts. And don't forget triple shares for the gate defenders. I'll have the accounting imps work out the distributions tonight." The goblin foreman's face split into a grin, revealing sharp, uneven teeth. "The litters will feast." As Grub hobbled away to oversee the cleanup, Zog turned his attention to the Tactical Oversight Network's long-range sensors. Sir Alistair's army was regrouping in the valley, but they weren't preparing for another assault. Instead, they were breaking camp. The siege towers were being dismantled. The battering ram was being dragged away. They were retreating. But before Zog could feel even a moment of relief, the network pinged a priority alert from its diplomatic monitoring subroutine. Zog focused on the new data stream, and his blood ran cold. Sir Alistair wasn't just retreating. He was sending messengers, fast riders on the best horses, heading in 3 different directions. And the messages they carried, intercepted and decoded by the network's linguistic analysis, were all variations on the same theme. Request immediate reinforcements from the Kingdom of Loria. Urgent aid required from the Silver Dominion. Call upon our allies in the eastern marches. The champion wasn't admitting defeat. He was escalating. Fort Stonefang had held against one army. But could it hold against four? Zog stared at the retreating human forces, his mind already calculating supply routes, resource allocations, diplomatic overtures to neutral territories. The battle was over. The war was about to begin in earnest. And somewhere in the back of his mind, the corporate analyst he'd once been whispered a single, terrifying truth: scaling up operations was always the hardest part. The morning after the siege of Fort Stonefang broke, Zog stood in his command chamber, the Tactical Oversight Network painting the air with shimmering data streams. The room, carved from the castle's ancient basalt, smelled of damp stone and the faint, sweet odor of the glowing fungus lamps that lined the walls. His three imps, Grick, Snarl, and Blip, scurried around a central table, arranging scrolls and clay tablets, their green skin glistening in the low light. Zog ignored the usual post-battle reports of casualties and repairs. His focus was on a different set of numbers: supply costs, resource depletion rates, and most tellingly, a cascading analysis of the human war economy. The network, that persistent mental interface from his past life as a corporate analyst, hummed with activity. It displayed real-time graphs showing the flow of gold, weapons, and magical materials across the continent. One data point stood out, pulsing with alarming intensity: dungeon cores. Dungeon cores, Zog muttered, his voice a low rumble in the quiet chamber. He was a goblin-like demon lord, shorter than a human but with keen, intelligent eyes that now scanned the projections. The nobility's monopoly. Of course. Grick looked up, his pointed ears twitching. Master? The goblin unions are requesting their profit shares from the hijacked wagons. Morale is at 85% and climbing. Process it, Zog said absently, his mind racing. The network zoomed in on the data. Dungeon cores, crystalline hearts of defeated dungeon monsters, were the primary source of magical energy in this world. They powered everything from enchanted weapons to healing potions. According to the network's analysis, over 90% of known core deposits were controlled by human noble houses, who artificially inflated prices by restricting supply and fueling conflicts to create demand. The war against Zog wasn't just about heroics, it was a profitable enterprise for the aristocracy. Zog's claws tapped the stone table. This isn't a military problem. It's a market inefficiency. He called for Crick, the Kobold scout who had turned double agent and led the resupply to Fort Stonefang. Minutes later, Crick entered, his scales still dusty from the road. He was taller than a goblin, with a lean, wiry frame and sharp eyes that darted around the room, assessing. Report, Zog said, not looking up from the data streams. Crick bowed slightly. Lord Zog. Sir Alistair's forces have retreated to their main camp, 20 miles east. Our scouts confirm he's sent messengers to the kingdoms of Loria, Viridia, and Frosthold. Reinforcements could arrive within 2 weeks. And the nobility's involvement? Zog asked, finally meeting Crick's gaze. Crick's tongue flicked out. The traitor I exposed was paid by House Blackwood. They're one of the largest core monopolists. They want the war to continue, it drives up core prices. Sir Alistair might be an honorable champion, but his backers are profiteers. Zog nodded. The pieces clicked into place. For months, he'd been playing defense, optimizing supply chains and unionizing monsters to survive. But survival wasn't enough. The network's projections showed that even with perfect logistics, a war on 4 fronts would eventually drain his resources. He needed to change the game. We're shifting strategy, Zog announced, his voice firm. From today, our primary objective isn't to defend territory. It's to dominate the dungeon core market. The imps stopped scurrying. Crick's eyes widened. Zog activated a new projection from the network. It displayed a map of the continent, with glowing dots marking known dungeon core deposits. Most were in human-controlled lands, but a few clusters shone in neutral territories, untamed wilderness, monster-held regions, and forgotten ruins. These, Zog said, pointing to a dense cluster in the Whispering Woods, a forest claimed by Treants and other neutral beings, are high-yield, rare cores. Untapped because no one's willing to negotiate with the locals. But Master, Snarl squeaked, we're demons. The Treants hate us more than humans. They hate inefficiency more, Zog replied, a faint smile touching his lips. The network shows their economy is stagnant. They harvest magical herbs but have no distribution network. We can offer them one. He spent the next hour issuing orders. The goblin unions, already buzzing from their profit shares, were tasked with expanding fungus farms to produce surplus food for trade. Kobold scouts, under Crick's command, were dispatched to secure routes to the Whispering Woods and other neutral zones. Zog used the network to optimize every detail: travel times, resource allocations, risk assessments. Morale, displayed as a glowing bar in his vision, ticked up to 90% as monsters saw new opportunities for profit. By afternoon, Zog was in the castle courtyard, addressing a crowd of unionized goblins and kobolds. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the excited chatter of hundreds of monsters. Zog stood on a raised platform, the network overlaying his view with data on each individual's efficiency rating. Listen up. Zog's voice carried over the noise, sharp and clear. The humans think they can crush us with swords and spells. But we have something stronger: our minds, and our ability to work together. From now on, every hijacked wagon, every trade deal, every optimized route earns you not just a share, but a stake in our future. We're going to make this territory the richest on the continent, and you'll all profit from it. A goblin in the front, named Grub, who had been promoted to foreman for his efficiency in manure collection, shouted, "What about the heroes? They're still out there." "Let them come," Zog said, his eyes gleaming. "While they're wasting gold on sieges, we'll be building wealth. Our new target, dungeon cores. First mission, secure trade with the Whispering Woods. Volunteers for the scouting team get double shares." A roar of approval erupted. Kobolds stepped forward, their eyes calculating potential profits. The network showed morale jumping to 95%. Zog felt a surge of satisfaction. This was power not from dark magic, but from organized, motivated labor. Over the next few days, Zog's territory transformed. The usual preparations for war, forging weapons, training troops, were sidelined. Instead, goblins worked overtime on farms, producing crates of glowing fungi and preserved meats. Kobold teams mapped safe paths through neutral lands, using the network's real-time data to avoid predators and rival monsters. Zog spent hours in negotiations, using his corporate skills to broker deals. With the Treants of the Whispering Woods, he offered a 50-50 split on core mining profits, plus a logistics network to distribute their herbs. The Treants, ancient beings who valued order, were intrigued by his efficiency metrics and agreed to a trial. One evening, as Zog reviewed the latest trade reports in his chamber, the network pinged with an alert. A new data stream appeared: profits from the first core extraction in the Whispering Woods. The numbers were staggering: rare cores sold at a premium, and with his optimized supply chains, costs were minimal. Morale hit 100%. Goblins and kobolds celebrated in the courtyards, their cheers echoing through the castle. But the network also showed a darker trend. Sir Alistair's reinforcements were mobilizing faster than expected. Messages intercepted by kobold scouts indicated the noble houses were pouring more gold into the war, desperate to maintain their monopoly. Zog's economic warfare was working, but it was provoking a fiercer response. Just as Zog was planning the next phase, expanding core mining to other neutral territories, a kobold runner burst into the chamber, panting. "Lord Zog! A message from Sir Alistair's camp. Delivered by a human herald under a flag of truce." The runner handed over a sealed scroll. Zog broke the wax, imprinted with the crest of House Blackwood, and read. The words were formal, flowery, but the meaning was clear. Sir Alistair, champion of the human kingdoms, requested a parley at dawn, 2 days hence, at a neutral location called the Stone Circle. He claimed to seek a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Zog's network immediately flagged the message. Probability analysis, 87% chance of a trap. Cross-referencing with scout reports showed increased human activity near the Stone Circle, including hidden troops and possible ambush points. But there was also a 12% chance of genuine negotiation. Sir Alistair might be growing wary of his noble backers. Zog leaned back, the scroll crumpling in his hand. The chamber felt suddenly colder. Around him, the imps watched silently, and Crick, who had entered unnoticed, stood by the door, his expression grim. "It's a trap," Crick said flatly. "House Blackwood won't let Alistair make peace. They'll use this to capture or kill you." Zog nodded. "Probably. But the network shows an opportunity. If we can expose the nobility's profiteering to Alistair directly, we might split their alliance. And even if it's a trap, we can turn it to our advantage." He stood, his mind already calculating. "Prepare a response. We accept the parley. But we do it on our terms, with optimized security, and a backup plan that makes this the most expensive trap they've ever set." As night fell, Zog's territory buzzed with new activity. Goblins checked weapons not for battle, but for a diplomatic escort. Kobolds scouted the stone circle, feeding data to the network. Profits from the core trade continued to soar, but Zog's focus was on the looming meeting. The chapter of defense was closing, the chapter of economic conquest was beginning, and it would start with a parley that could change everything or end it all. The chapter ends with Zog staring at the network's projections, the data streams showing both soaring profits and rising threats, as he whispered to himself, "Time to audit the competition." The morning mist clung to the whispering woods like a damp shroud, swirling around the ancient standing stones that formed the stone circle. Zog stood at the edge of the clearing, his goblin-like form silhouetted against the gray dawn. His three-fingered hands rested on the rough bark of a gnarled oak, but his mind was elsewhere, immersed in the glowing blue interface of his Tactical Oversight Network. Morale, 94%. Resource efficiency, 91%. Security protocols, active. Threat assessment, 87% probability of hostile engagement. The numbers scrolled before his inner vision, a comforting grid of data in a world that still felt alien. Tanaka, no, Zog now, he reminded himself, took a slow breath. The corporate analyst in him had learned to trust the numbers, even when they pointed toward danger. Especially then. "Boss," a gravelly voice whispered from behind him. Grick, his lead goblin union representative, shifted nervously. The green-skinned creature wore a surprisingly well-fitted leather jerkin, a symbol of his merit-based promotion. "Scouts report the humans approaching from the East Road. 20 knights, plus the champion. No siege engines." Zog nodded, his yellow eyes narrowing. "And our teams?" "In position," Grick said, a hint of pride in his voice. Goblin squads 1 through 4 concealed in the tree line, armed with toxin-tipped spears from the optimized fungus farms. Kobold archers in the upper branches, profit-sharing bonuses activated for every successful suppression shot. And the special delivery is ready at coordinates 7x12. Special delivery. Zog allowed himself a thin smile. 3 hijacked human supply wagons, loaded with iron rations, medical supplies, and most importantly, official noble seals from House Valerius. Evidence, carefully curated over weeks of intercepted caravans. "Remember the protocol," Zog said, turning to face Grick fully. The goblin stood straighter under his gaze. "No engagement unless I give the signal. We're here to talk first. But if they attack..." "We hit their supply lines mid-fight," Grick finished, tapping the crude map etched on his forearm. "Already got Kobold teams positioned along their retreat route. They won't get far without their wagons." Zog clapped the goblin on the shoulder. "Good. Now take your position. And Grick, bonus pay for everyone if we pull this off without casualties." The goblin's eyes widened, then gleamed with determination. He scurried off into the mist, leaving Zog alone with his thoughts and his network. Why did I accept this? The question surfaced, unbidden. The 87% trap probability glowed ominously in his interface. But the remaining 13%, that was the chance to end this war not with blood, but with balance sheets. To expose the rot at the heart of the human kingdoms, the nobility who grew fat on dungeon core monopolies while sending young soldiers to die. He remembered his old life, Tanaka in a Tokyo high-rise, optimizing supply chains for a corporation that never saw the human cost. Here, the cost was visible every day in the scarred faces of goblins who'd known nothing but starvation before unionization, in the kobolds who now had profit-sharing accounts instead of empty bellies. A horn sounded, clear and cold through the mist. Zog stepped into the stone circle. The stones loomed around him, twice his height, their surfaces carved with runes that had faded to ghosts. In the center, a flat altar stone served as the meeting point. Zog placed his hands on its cool surface, feeling the ancient magic thrum beneath his fingertips. His network immediately pinged. *ambient magical energy detected. Non-hostile. Possibly amplification properties, *. Interesting. He'd have to study this later. For now, he focused on the figures emerging from the opposite tree line. Sir Alistair, the legendary champion, led the procession. Even through the mist, his presence was imposing. He stood a full head taller than his knights, his armor not the polished silver of storybooks, but practical steel darkened by travel and combat. A greatsword rested across his back, its hilt worn smooth by use. His face was all sharp angles and grim lines, a beard of iron gray framing a mouth set in a permanent frown. But Zog's network saw more. Sir Alistair, fatigue level 68%. Resource depletion in personal supplies, 42%. Loyalty to crown, 98%. Suspicion toward accompanying nobles, rising, *. The knights fanned out behind him, hands on sword hilts. Among them, Zog's interface highlighted two figures in richer, less practical armor, Lord Cedric of House Valerius and Lady Ilara of House Thorn. Their fatigue levels were lower, their personal supplies nearly full. And their loyalty metrics fluctuated strangely, tied not to the crown, but to financial indicators Zog recognized from his analysis: dungeon core market values, war contract allocations. Demon Lord Zog, Sir Alistair's voice boomed across the clearing, devoid of ceremony. You requested this parley. I accepted your invitation, Zog corrected calmly, his voice raspier than he'd like. He still wasn't used to the goblin vocal cords. And I come unarmed, as agreed. He spread his empty hands. In truth, his greatest weapon was the data streaming through his mind, but they didn't need to know that. Sir Alistair stepped forward alone, stopping 10 paces from the altar stone. His eyes, gray as the mist, scanned Zog with clinical detachment. You've caused considerable trouble. Fort Stonefawn should have fallen in a day. Instead, my army sits stalled, its supply lines, compromised. The last word held a note of grudging respect. Efficiency improvements, Zog said simply. My people work better when they share in the profits. A snort came from behind Alistair. Lord Cedric pushed forward, his ornate breastplate gleaming dully. Your people are monsters. They steal, they sabotage, they unionize, Zog interrupted, keeping his tone neutral. They negotiate fair wages. They optimize resource gathering. And yes, they intercept poorly guarded supply caravans. But tell me, Lord Cedric, how much did House Valerius profit from the last war contract? The 1-4 iron rations that turned out to be half-rotten grain? The noble's face flushed. How dare you? I dare because I have the numbers, Zog said, and for the first time, he let his corporate voice surface, cool, precise, undeniable. He tapped the altar stone, and his network projected a holographic display only he could see. But he described it for them. Dungeon core production in the southern mines, down 30% this year. Yet prices have tripled. War expenditure in the human kingdoms, up 400%. Noble house profits from military contracts, up 700%. Casualty rates among common soldiers, up 250%. He paused, letting the numbers hang in the misty air. Sir Alistair hadn't moved, but his knuckles were white where they gripped his sword belt. What are you implying? The champion asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm not implying. I'm stating facts, Zog said. This war isn't about defeating a demon lord. It's about profit. The nobility monopolizes dungeon cores, the key ingredient for magical advancement, for healing potions, for everything that matters in your society. They create scarcity, drive up prices, then lobby for wars to justify the expenditure. And you, Sir Alistair, are their blunt instrument. Lady Ilara stepped forward now, her smile sharp as a dagger. Charming fiction. But we are here to discuss your surrender, monster. Not economics. Zog met her gaze. His network showed her heartbeat elevated, her pupils dilated, tells of someone hiding something. Then let's discuss economics. I control the newly discovered core deposits in the Whispering Woods. High purity, easily accessible with proper mining techniques. I'm willing to trade. Sir Alistair's eyes narrowed. Trade? Peace for cores, Zog said. A steady supply, at fair market prices, not the inflated rates your nobility charges. Enough to stabilize your kingdom's economy. Enough to make war and profitable. For a long moment, silence held the stone circle. The mist thickened, swirling around the standing stones like ghostly fingers. Zog watched the champion's face, saw the conflict there, the lifetime of loyalty warring with the dawning suspicion that he'd been used. Then Lord Cedric moved. Treason, he shouted, drawing his sword. The demon seeks to corrupt you, Alistair. Knights, seize him. It happened too fast for normal reaction. But Zog's network had been tracking every muscle twitch, every shifted gaze. The 87% probability flashed red in his vision. Asterisk hostile action detected. Initiating countermeasures, asterisk. Zog didn't flinch. He simply raised a hand, not in defense, but in signal. From the tree line, goblin horns blared, raw and guttural. Not an attack signal, but a diversion. And from the east road, where the human knights had left their horses and spare supplies, came the sound of splintering wood and startled shouts. Grick's special delivery, the 3 hijacked wagons, now being loudly, visibly unloaded by kobolds in full view of the rear guard. Our supplies, one of the knights cried, turning toward the noise. In that moment of confusion, Sir Alistair moved, but not toward Zog. He spun, his greatsword clearing its sheath in one smooth motion, and placed himself between Lord Cedric and Zog. Stand down, Cedric, the champion growled. This parley was under flag of truce. He's poisoning your mind. Lord Cedric spat. Kill the demon, and be done with it. He lunged, not at Zog, but at Alistair's exposed side. A feint, then a twist toward Zog. The noble's sword flashed in the grey light. Zog didn't have time to dodge. But he didn't need to. A goblin spear, toxin-tipped and perfectly aimed, shot from the trees. It struck Lord Cedric's sword arm, not deep enough to maim, but enough to make him drop his weapon with a cry. The toxin, a refined version from Zog's optimized fungus farms, worked instantly, causing muscle spasms. Chaos erupted. Lady Ilara shouted orders, but half the knights were already looking toward the commotion at their supply wagons. The other half hesitated, their loyalty torn between their champion and their noble patrons. Zog's network lit up with real-time updates. Asterisk Goblin Squad 2 engaging human rearguard. Minimal force, distraction only, asterisk. Asterisk Kobold archers suppressing noble loyalists. Non-lethal shots, asterisk. Asterisk wagons secured. Evidence packages being distributed to neutral observers, Trey and allies, asterisk. He'd planned for this. Every contingency. But he hadn't planned for Sir Alistair. The champion moved through the chaos like a force of nature. He disarmed 2 knights who moved toward Zog, not with lethal blows, but with precise strikes to their weapon hands. He grabbed Lord Cedric as the noble tried to flee, hauling him back to the altar stone. Enough! Alistair roared, and the sound echoed off the standing stones, amplified by whatever magic slept there. The fighting stilled. Panting, Zog watched as the champion threw Lord Cedric to the ground before him. The noble whimpered, the toxin still coursing through him. You spoke of evidence, Sir Alistair said, his eyes locked on Zog. Show me. Zog nodded to Grick, who emerged from the trees carrying a leather satchel. Inside were documents, intercepted letters, supply manifests with forged signatures, financial records showing transfers between noble houses and dungeon core monopolies. As Alistair scanned them, his face grew darker. This is House Valerius's seal. And thorns. War contracts inflated by 30%. Kickbacks to generals. He looked up, and for the first time, Zog saw something break in the champion's stern expression. The king knows nothing of this. It wasn't a question. My analysis suggests he's been kept deliberately uninformed, Zog said quietly. The nobility controls information flow. They needed a war to justify their price gouging. And they needed a hero to lead it. Lady Ilara tried to slip away, but 2 goblins blocked her path, spears leveled. She froze, her composure finally cracking. Sir Alistair sank to one knee, not in submission, but in exhaustion. The greatsword slipped from his fingers, clattering on the stone. All those deaths. Fort Stonefawn, the border skirmishes, for what? So a few nobles could buy new palaces? Zog stepped closer, careful, non-threatening. It doesn't have to continue. My offer stands. Trade, not war. I'll supply dungeon cores at fair prices. You exposed the corruption. Together, we bankrupt the warhawks. The champion looked up, his gray eyes meeting Zog's yellow ones. You're a demon lord. I'm a logistics specialist, Zog corrected. And right now, I'm the only one with a solution that doesn't end with more graves. Around them, the mist began to thin. The goblins and kobolds held their positions, disciplined, waiting. The human knights stood uncertainly, their allegiance shifting moment by moment. Sir Alistair rose slowly. He looked at Lord Cedric, now trembling on the ground, then at Lady Ilara, pale and trapped. Finally, he looked at Zog. What guarantees? The same guarantees my unionized workers get, Zog said. Transparency. Accountability. Profit sharing. My network can track every core from mine to market. No monopolies. No price fixing. A long pause. Then Sir Alistair nodded, once, sharp and decisive. I will take you to the king. With this evidence. And your proposal. But as he spoke, his eyes flickered to something behind Zog. A warning. Zog's network screamed. Asterisk projectile detected. High velocity. Trajectory, your position, asterisk. He started to turn, but Alistair was faster. The champion shoved him aside, taking the crossbow bolt meant for Zog's back. It struck Alistair's shoulder, punching through armor with a sickening crunch. The champion grunted, stumbling. From the trees, a figure in nondescript leathers, a noble assassin, Zog's network identified, fled into the woods. After him. Grick shouted, and goblins gave chase. But Zog was already at Alistair's side, calling for medical supplies from the hijacked wagons. As he applied pressure to the wound, his network updated. Asterisk Sir Alistair, critical injury. Loyalty metric now 100% to new alliance. King's awareness, confirmed 0, asterisk. And one more alert, blinking urgently. Asterisk assassin carried House Thorn insignia. Lady Ilara's orders. Full conspiracy exposed, asterisk. Zog looked down at the wounded champion, then at the captured nobles, then at his waiting monsters. The parley was over. The real battle, the economic one, was just beginning. And for the first time, he had a human ally who understood the cost. The air in the makeshift infirmary within Zog's castle was thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and damp stone. Sir Alistair lay on a cot, his armor removed and a bandage wrapped around his shoulder where the assassin's bolt had struck. The champion's face was pale, but his eyes were sharp, fixed on Zog, who stood by a rough-hewn table covered in scrolls and glowing data projections from his Tactical Oversight Network. Zog's goblin-like form was hunched over the table, his fingers tracing lines of light that shimmered in the dim room. The network displayed real-time stats, morale at 85%, resource efficiency at 92%, and a new metric, political leverage, flashing at 65% and climbing. 3 imps scurried about, bringing fresh bandages and bowls of steaming fungus broth, their movements efficient under Zog's silent directives. You saved my life, Alistair said, his voice raspy but firm. Why? I came here to destroy you. Zog didn't look up from the data. Because dead champions make poor allies. And you're worth more to me alive than as another corpse in this wasteful war. He gestured to the projections. Look at this. Supply chain manipulations by Lord Cedric and Lady Ilara. They've been siphoning gold from the kingdom's treasury for years, inflating dungeon core prices to fund their private armies. Your king thinks he's fighting for honor, but he's just a pawn in their profit scheme. Alistair pushed himself up on his elbows, wincing at the pain. Show me. Zog expanded a projection, revealing intricate flowcharts of resource movements. See here? Dungeon cores mined from the eastern crags are supposed to go directly to the royal armory. But my kobold scouts track shipments diverted to Cedric's private warehouses. He resells them at triple the price to other nobles, creating artificial scarcity. The war drags on because it's profitable for them. Alistair's jaw tightened. I've seen the shortages at the front. Soldiers go without proper enchantments because cores are too expensive. I thought it was logistics failures, not corruption. It's both, Zog said, his tone analytical. Inefficient logistics enable the corruption. My network shows their supply lines are deliberately fragmented, multiple middlemen, unnecessary checkpoints. Each step adds cost and delay, lining their pockets while your army suffers. He pulled up another data set. And here's the kicker, Lady Ilara has been leaking your troop movements to demon lords in the south, ensuring constant skirmishes that drain royal coffers. She profits from selling intelligence to both sides. Alistair's hands clenched into fists. Treason. All of it. He looked at Zog, his expression a mix of anger and curiosity. How did you get this data? Magic? Better, Zog said, a faint smile touching his lips. Perfect logistics. My kobolds are everywhere, in trade caravans, taverns, even noble households as servants. They report everything to the network. Combine that with optimized data analysis, and you have a real-time map of every conspiracy on the continent. He leaned closer, his red eyes glowing in the projection's light. Here's my proposal, Alistair. An alliance. You take this evidence to your king. Expose Cedric and Ilara. In return, I'll provide dungeon cores at fair prices, stabilizing your kingdom's economy. We end the war not with swords, but with supply chains. Alistair was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the bandage on his shoulder. You're asking me to betray my oath to the crown. No, Zog said firmly. I'm asking you to fulfill it. Your oath is to protect the kingdom, not line the pockets of corrupt nobles. Look at my territory. He waved a hand, and the projection shifted to show bustling goblin markets, kobold scouts patrolling efficiently, and fungus farms yielding record harvests. Morale is high because everyone benefits. Fair wages, profit sharing, merit-based promotions. My monsters live better than most of your peasants. Isn't that what a ruler should want? Prosperity, not perpetual war? Alistair's eyes scanned the data, taking in the stats, 95% goblin satisfaction, 300% increase in kobold productivity since unionization. It's efficient. I'll give you that. But why should I trust a demon lord? Because I don't want your throne, Zog said, his voice dropping to a pragmatic whisper. I want trade routes. I want economic dominance. A stable human kingdom is better for business than a war zone. My network projects a 150% profit increase if we normalize relations. Your king gets a stronger economy, I get new markets, and the warhawks go bankrupt. Everyone wins except the corrupt. He pulled out a physical scroll, handing it to Alistair. This is a draft trade agreement. Dungeon cores at 50% below current market rates, in exchange for open borders for my kobold merchants. It includes clauses for joint anti-corruption task forces. Sign it, and we'll bring down Cedric and Ilara together. Alistair unrolled the scroll, his eyes widening at the detailed terms. You've thought of everything. Even provisions for compensating soldiers displaced by peace.
Waste not, want not, Zog said. Idle soldiers are a resource drain. Retrain them as guards for the new trade routes. My network already has optimization plans. Outside, the sound of goblin drills echoed as unionized workers practiced coordinated maneuvers. Alistair listened, then nodded slowly. All right. I'll do it. But on one condition, I lead the operation to expose them. I owe my king that much.
Agreed, Zog said, extending a clawed hand.
But we do it my way. Data-driven, with minimal risk.
First, we need to bankrupt them before they can rally support.
He called over an imp, who brought a map. My network has identified a secret gold shipment from Cedric's mines to his offshore vaults. It's moving tonight through the Whispering Woods.
We hijack it, not to steal, but to document.
We'll use the gold as evidence of his embezzlement. Alistair raised an eyebrow. Hijack? With what army? Zog's smile widened. With kobolds.
Unionized, profit-sharing kobolds who get a bonus for every successful operation.
He tapped the map. They're already in position. Led by Crix, my head scout, he's got a 98% efficiency rating. They'll intercept the shipment, plant tracking crystals, and let it proceed. By dawn, we'll have full data on Cedric's entire laundering network.
Alistair stood, testing his shoulder.
Let me come. I need to see this efficiency in action. Zog nodded. Fine. But stay back and observe. This isn't a battlefield charge, it's a precision operation.
As night fell, Zog and Alistair, accompanied by a small guard of goblins, made their way to a ridge overlooking the Whispering Woods. The forest was dark, but Zog's network provided a thermal overlay on his vision, showing the gold shipment, a convoy of 6 wagons guarded by 20 mercenaries, moving along a hidden path. Through a data-linked earpiece, Zog communicated with Crix.
Status update.
Crix's voice crackled back, eager.
All teams in position, boss. Wagon 3 has the bulk of the gold reinforced underside compartment. We've laid caltrops ahead to slow them.
Profit-sharing bonuses are calculated and ready for distribution post-op. Alistair whispered, they sound like accountants with claws.
The best kind, Zog murmured. Watch.
The convoy hit the caltrops, wheels screeching to a halt.
Mercenaries jumped down, cursing.
From the shadows, kobolds emerged, not with weapons raised, but with tools. They moved in synchronized teams. One group distracted the guards with illusionary noises from the woods, another slipped under the wagons to plant tiny tracking crystals, and a third quietly replaced a few gold bars with painted lead replicas, logging each swap in real time to the network.
Alistair watched, amazed. No violence. Just redirection.
Efficiency, Zog corrected.
Violence is a resource drain, medical costs, morale drops, replacement training.
This way, we get the data without the overhead.
Within minutes, the kobolds melted back into the forest. The mercenaries, confused but finding no attackers, resumed their journey, unaware their shipment was now tagged and partially fake. Crix reported in. Operation complete, boss. Tracking active, data streaming.
Morale boost. Observed teams are already discussing bonus spending. One kobold wants to invest in a fungus farm franchise. Zog turned to Alistair.
See? By tomorrow, we'll have a full map of Cedric's vaults.
We present it to your king, along with the trade agreement. He'll have no choice but to act. Alistair looked at Zog, his earlier suspicion replaced by grudging respect.
You're not a demon lord. You're a logistics tycoon.
Same thing, in this world, Zog said, his network pinging with a new alert. The gold shipment had reached a hidden dock, where it was being loaded onto a ship. The war ends when the money dries up.
And after tonight, Cedric's funds are as good as gone.
As they walked back to the castle, Alistair spoke softly.
What happens after? If we succeed? Zog's mind was already racing with projections. Then we optimize.
Your kingdom becomes my biggest trade partner.
My kobolds expand into new markets.
Maybe we even take on the dungeon core monopoly together, break it wide open.
The network shows unlimited growth potential.
He paused, looking at the stars.
But first, we bankrupt the Warhawks. 1 gold shipment at a time. Back in the castle, Zog reviewed the incoming data. The tracking crystals were transmitting perfectly, revealing Cedric's offshore accounts. Alistair drafted a letter to the king, detailing the evidence.
Around them, the castle hummed with activity: goblins preparing for expanded trade routes, kobolds analyzing profit charts, imps optimizing supply lines for the coming peace.
Zog's Tactical Oversight Network updated, political leverage now at 80%.
He allowed himself a moment of satisfaction.
This wasn't just survival anymore, it was domination.
And as the chapter closed, a final ping echoed in his mind. The hijacked gold shipment had been fully documented, and Crix's team was already planning their next operation, morale at an all-time high. The morning mist clung to the jagged peaks of the obsidian spires like damp gauze, but within the heart of Zog's territory, the air hummed with a different kind of energy. It was the sound of commerce, of industry, of a system running at peak efficiency. Zog stood on the newly reinforced battlements of his castle, no longer crumbling but a functional, if not beautiful, nexus of logistics. His 3 original imps, now promoted to foreman, scurried below, directing squads of unionized goblins loading the last of the day's dungeon core shipments onto reinforced kobold-drawn wagons. His Tactical Oversight Network floated in his mind's eye, a cascade of green numbers and flowing diagrams.
Morale, 98%. Resource efficiency, 94%. Dungeon core production, 1,200 units daily, with a 0.3% defect rate.
The mines in the neutral territories, secured through the trade deals brokered with kobold tribes, were operating at 300% above baseline projections. Zog allowed himself a thin smile, the expression still strange on his goblin-like features. In his previous life as Tanaka, he had crashed markets with spreadsheets and leveraged buyouts. Here, he would do it with literal tons of enchanted stone. Final checks complete, Lord Zog, chirped Grick, the lead imp foreman, clambering up the battlement ladder. The creature wore a tiny, meticulously stitched vest, a symbol of his managerial status, demanded by the union contract.
Batch 12 is ready. Quality assurance passed by the Kobold Gym Singers.
Purity is at 98.7%, well above the 85% standard the human kingdoms have been peddling.
Excellent, Zog said, his voice calm. He didn't need to raise it, the data did the talking. Release them to the caravan masters. Remember the routing: primary flow to the capital markets via the eastern trade road, secondary drip feeds to the border towns where the nobility's agents are weakest. I want saturation within 48 hours. Grick saluted, a gesture the imps had adopted after observing human soldiers. The profit-sharing bonuses are already calculated. The teams are motivated. They can smell the gold. As the imps scurried away, Zog's network pinged.
A private channel opened, displaying the stern, bandaged face of Sir Alistair. The champion was recovering in a well-supplied infirmary deep within the castle, his loyalty now firmly aligned with Zog's after the revelation of the nobility's corruption. The video feed, a feature of the network Zog still found disconcertingly advanced, showed Alistair propped up on pillows, a slate of data in his hands. Zog, Alistair's voice was rough but clear. The king has received my full report.
He's furious. And convinced.
The evidence of Lord Cedric's gold shipment being rerouted to private coffers, the inflated core prices, the deliberate supply shortages to the front lines, it's undeniable. His Majesty has issued a royal decree: all trade monopolies on dungeon cores are suspended, effective immediately.
The market is open. Zog nodded. This was the moment.
The trade agreement, negotiated in the shadow of captured champions and hijacked gold, was now royal policy.
And our first shipment?
Already entered the capital's main auction house.
I have eyes on the ground.
The auctioneer nearly fainted when he saw the quantity and quality.
They're starting the bidding now. Let's watch, Zog said, and a sub-window opened in his network, streaming real-time data from the auction house floor. He could see the crowded hall through a Kobold scout's hidden ocular implant, another logistical innovation. The atmosphere was electric, then confused, then panicked. The auctioneer, a portly man in silks, stammered as lot after lot of Zog's high-purity dungeon cores hit the block. The initial bids were high, driven by noble agents expecting scarcity. But as the 10th, then 20th, then 50th identical lot appeared, the numbers began to plummet. Whispers turned to shouts. A noble in a peacock feather hat stood up, face purple, demanding to know the source. The auctioneer could only shrug, pointing to the royal seal on the shipment manifest. Zog's network tracked the price curve in a steep, red dive. 100 gold per core. 80, 50. 30, by midday, it stabilized at 15 gold, a fifth of the previous monopoly price. The cascade was instantaneous. Nobles who had invested their entire fortunes in hoarding cores watched their paper wealth evaporate. Banks called in loans. Estates were suddenly over-leveraged. In the capital, the financial district descended into chaos. Alistair's feed showed him shaking his head in grim awe. It's a bloodbath. But without a drop of blood spilled. Lord Cedric's faction is screaming about demonic manipulation, but the king is holding firm. He sees the stability your cores bring. The army's mages can finally afford to recharge their staves. The hospitals can power healing arrays. For the common folk, this is a blessing. For the common folk, yes, Zog said, his mind already analyzing the secondary effects. His network showed morale in his territory ticking upward, 99%. The unionized goblins and kobolds were seeing their profit-sharing bonuses swell as sales revenue flooded in. A new notification popped up, a trade delegation from a previously neutral dwarven clan, requesting an audience. Economic dominance wasn't just a concept, it was becoming a tangible force. Over the next week, the effects deepened. Zog's optimized minds worked round the clock, their outputs coordinated by his network to avoid glut but maintain relentless pressure. He established a standardized grading system for cores, something the corrupt nobility had never bothered with, creating consumer confidence. His kobold caravans, protected by unionized goblin guards, with excellent hazard pay, became a common sight on roads once patrolled by hostile knights. In the great hall of his castle, now repurposed into a command and logistics center, Zog met with his leadership council, Grick the Imp, Kresk the Goblin Union representative, a shrewd negotiator with a fondness for data-driven arguments, and Sithis, the kobold chieftain who had brokered the mine deals. Maps glowed on stone tables, not of battlefields, but of trade routes, resource nodes, and market saturation graphs. Morale has hit 100%, Kresk reported, his voice proud. The workers are talking about investing their bonuses in the new fungus farm cooperatives. Productivity is up another 20%. We've even had applications from a few disgruntled human merchants wanting to defect. Sithis hissed softly, a sign of kobold satisfaction. The radical nobles are getting desperate. My scouts report gatherings at Lord Cedric's country estate. They're not discussing trade. They're sharpening swords. They blame you for their ruin. Zog absorbed this. His network had already flagged the anomaly, unusual movement of private guards, withdrawals of heirloom weapons from vaults, a spike in dark magic component purchases in black markets. The data painted a clear picture, a cornered animal, lashing out. Probability of direct attack, he asked aloud, though the network was already calculating. 87%, Grick squeaked, consulting a floating readout. They've lost economically. Military action is their only remaining leverage. But they're fragmented. Our intelligence suggests maybe 50 hardliners, with some hired mercenaries. They lack supply lines. They're running on emotion, not logistics. Emotion can be a powerful fuel, Zog mused. But it burns out quickly without a steady supply of food, arrows, and morale. He began issuing orders, his voice steady, each command optimized by the network. Kresk, shift all non-essential production to defense readiness. I want the castle's stockpiles at maximum. Sithis, pull your scouts back to a defensive perimeter. I want eyes on every approach. Grick, coordinate with the infirmary, prepare for casualties, just in case. And activate the emergency communication protocol with Sir Alistair. As his team sprang into action, Zog walked to the western window.
The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the bustling courtyard below. Goblins and kobolds worked in seamless harmony, moving crates, checking wagon axles, laughing, a sound that had been unthinkable months ago. This was what he had built. Not an empire of fear, but one of efficiency and mutual benefit. The network's main display glowed softly in his vision, a continent map with his territory at the center, glowing green with economic activity, while the human kingdoms showed patches of red financial distress and yellow instability.
A new ping. Alistair's face appeared, looking tense. Zog. I've just left the king.
The radical faction has made their move.
They've declared you an economic usurper and are rallying under Lord Cedric's banner. They're bypassing the royal army using back roads, old teleportation circles they've kept secret. The king is mobilizing loyalist troops, but they're days away. Cedric's force is smaller, but they're coming fast. And they're bringing siege weapons loaded with dark magic payloads.
They mean to burn your logistics to the ground. Zog felt a cold clarity settle over him. This was the inevitable backlash.
You couldn't dismantle a centuries-old corrupt system without making enemies who would rather die fighting than adapt.
His network began updating in real time, enemy force estimated at 60 combatants, plus mercenaries, ETA 6 hours. They were moving under cover of darkness, using magical concealment. But they had made one mistake: they were moving through a narrow mountain pass that Zog's kobolds had mapped in exquisite detail.
"Thank you, Alistair," Zog said.
"Hold the king's forces ready."
"But this is my territory." "They want a fight?" "I'll give them one.
But not the fight they expect." He closed the channel and opened a general broadcast to every unionized monster in his domain. His voice, amplified by the network, echoed through mines, farms, and fortifications.
"Attention all personnel. This is Zog. We have a situation. A group of radical nobles, bankrupted by their own greed, is approaching to destroy what we've built. They think wealth comes from hoarding. We know it comes from work, from fairness, from a well-oiled supply chain. They will attack within hours. I need everyone at their stations. This is not just a defense of our home. It is a defense of our way of life. Efficiency bonuses are tripled for the duration of the engagement. Let's show them what happens when you mess with the logistics department." A roar went up, not of mindless fury, but of determined solidarity. Morale didn't dip, it hardened into something fierce. Zog watched as his network lit up with activity, goblins manning newly installed ballistae on the walls, kobolds setting up tripwires and pitfall traps along the approach routes, imps running final checks on the castle's reinforced gates. The castle, once a crumbling ruin, was now a fortress of industry, and every cog in the machine knew its place. As night fell, Zog stood alone in the command center, the lights of data streams reflecting in his dark eyes. The network showed the enemy's progress as a cluster of red dots inching through the pass.
They were hours away. His own forces were a sea of green readiness icons. He had optimized for this. Every arrow was counted, every healing potion logged, every monster's morale monitored. But a flicker of unease touched him, not fear, but the analytical caution of a corporate strategist.
Dark magic payloads.
That was the wild card. Magic could bypass physical logistics if powerful enough. He pulled up the schematics of the castle's newly installed mana dispersion fields, a joint project with the Kobold gem singers.
Efficiency, 78%. Not perfect, but it would have to do.
Outside, the first stars appeared. The air grew cold. Somewhere in the darkness, a faction of desperate nobles was coming, bringing fire and shadow to crash against the unyielding engine of Zog's economy. The cliffhanger hung in the quiet, the attack was imminent, and for all his data, the outcome would be decided not just by numbers, but by the will of those who believed in a system that worked for them. The morning dawned with an unnatural chill that seeped through the stone walls of Zog's castle. From his command center, a repurposed throne room now filled with glowing data projections from his Tactical Oversight Network, Zog watched the horizon darken not with clouds, but with the gathering forces of Lord Cedric's desperate coalition.
Network status, 100% operational, the mental interface chimed in his mind.
Enemy forces detected, 2,000 human soldiers, 300 dark mages, 15 siege engines powered by corrupted dungeon cores.
ETA, 45 minutes.
Critical vulnerability identified, Western Wall, Section 7B, structural integrity at 65% due to previous mana erosion.
Zog's goblin-like features tightened as he absorbed the data.
His 3 original imps, now promoted to logistics supervisors, scurried around him, their claws tapping on stone tablets that mirrored his network displays.
Grick, status on reinforcement supply lines?
A green-skinned imp with spectacles made from polished beetle shells saluted.
All unionized goblin battalions reporting in, boss.
Morale at 98%, efficiency bonuses activated.
Kobold sabotage teams are positioned along enemy approach routes. But Grick hesitated, his voice dropping. The dark magic siege engines. Our scouts say they bypass physical defenses.
They're targeting the castle's mana lattice directly.
Zog's network confirmed it with flashing red alerts.
The nobles weren't attacking his supply chains, they were using arcane weaponry that ignored logistics entirely, striking at the magical foundation of his territory.
For the first time since his reincarnation, a cold knot formed in his stomach.
This wasn't a problem he could solve with optimized manure collection or profit-sharing schemes. Redirect all resources, Zog commanded, his voice steady despite the rising panic. Priority 1, reinforce Section 7B with enchanted stone from the northern quarry. Activate Emergency Protocol Delta, triple bonuses for any team that secures or disables a siege engine. As his orders echoed through the network, the castle sprang to life. Unionized goblins in standardized leather armor moved with precision that would make any human general weep with envy. Kobold scouts, their scales gleaming with recently distributed profit share coins, scaled the walls with grappling hooks. The air hummed with efficiency, but beneath it thrummed the ominous energy of approaching dark magic. Zog climbed to the highest parapet, the wind whipping through his dark robes. Below, his territory spread out, not the blasted wasteland of typical demon lords, but thriving fungus farms, organized housing districts, and trade roads bustling with monster caravans. All of it threatened by the approaching shadow.
Lord Cedric's army crested the hill like a wave of darkness.
The noble himself rode at the front, his once fine armor now tarnished and patched, his face twisted with the desperation of a ruined man. Behind him rolled the siege engines, massive constructs of black iron and glowing purple crystals that pulsed with stolen dungeon core energy.
Zog! Cedric's voice boomed across the distance, amplified by magic.
Surrender your territory and your cursed network.
Your economic tricks end today. Zog's network calculated response options. Diplomacy, 12% success probability. Strategic withdrawal, 23%.
Full defense with optimized resource allocation, 65%.
He chose the last.
Lord Cedric. Zog called back, his own voice enhanced by a simple amplification crystal his kobolds had optimized for maximum clarity.
Your attack is economically irrational.
The cost in lives and resources far exceeds any potential gain. Stand down and I'll offer fair market value for your remaining assets. A ripple of laughter went through the noble ranks, but it was edged with hysteria. These were men who had lost everything to Zog's market flooding, their wealth, their status, their future.
Rationality had left them weeks ago. Fire! Cedric screamed.
The siege engines hummed to life. Beams of corrupted purple energy lanced across the battlefield, not striking walls or soldiers, but passing through them to strike the invisible mana lattice that underpinned reality in demon territories.
The castle shuddered. Zog's network flashed warnings, mana integrity at 89%. Section 7B now at 52% structural integrity. Morale holding at 95% due to triple bonus activation. All units, coordinated strike pattern Gamma. Zog commanded through the network.
Goblin artillery teams, target siege engine support crews.
Kobold sabotage squads, go for the crystal conduits. The battle erupted in a chaos that Zog's mind transformed into orderly data streams. Goblin catapults optimized for maximum payload efficiency launched not rocks, but canisters of hallucinogenic spores harvested from the northern fungus farms.
They burst among the human soldiers, who began stumbling and swinging at imaginary foes.
Kobold teams emerged from hidden tunnels, their small forms darting between legs to plant explosive charges on siege engine components. One charge detonated, and a siege engine sputtered, its purple beam flickering. But the dark mages responded. Chanting in unison, they erected shields of shimmering darkness that deflected physical attacks.
The remaining siege engines fired again.
This time, the beams struck true. Section 7B of the western wall didn't crumble, it dissolved.
Stone turned to sand, mortar to dust, as the dark magic unraveled the very essence of the construction.
A 20-foot gap opened directly into the castle courtyard.
Breach! Breach! Cries went up from both sides. Cedric's eyes gleamed with mad triumph.
Forward! Kill the demon and take what's ours.
Human soldiers surged through the gap, only to find not the disorganized rabble they expected, but ranks of unionized goblins in perfect formation. Their commander, a grizzled goblin named Krug who had risen through Zog's merit-based promotion system, raised a spear tipped with optimized steel.
Hold the line! Krug bellowed. Remember the profit sharing. Every human you stop means more coins for your families.
The goblins roared, not with mindless bloodlust, but with the fervor of workers protecting their investment. They fought with disciplined efficiency, their movements coordinated through Zog's real-time network updates. Where one goblin fell, another immediately filled the gap, their morale sustained by the knowledge that fallen comrades' families would receive full benefits.
Zog watched from above, his network feeding him constant updates. Resource consumption, 34% of stockpiles. Reinforcement ETA, 8 minutes from eastern border forts. Morale, 92% and holding. Critical alert, 3 siege engines repositioning for direct strike on command center. He had to buy time. Grick. Redirect all available mana crystals to temporary barrier generation at Section 7B. But boss, that's our emergency reserve for. Do it. The imps scrambled.
Moments later, a shimmering blue barrier of pure mana snapped into existence across the breach, holding back the human tide. But Zog's network showed the cost, mana reserves now at 41%. Barrier stability, 78% and dropping. The 3 remaining siege engines powered up, their crystals glowing brighter. Cedric had learned he was targeting the command center directly. Then, from the east, horns sounded. Not the crude blasts of goblin instruments, but the clear, piercing calls of optimized brass that Zog's kobolds had engineered for maximum auditory impact.
Reinforcements.
A flood of monsters poured into the battlefield, not just goblins and kobolds, but trolls from the northern mountains, harpies from the southern cliffs, even a contingent of neutral earth elementals Zog had secured trade agreements with. All moved with the same eerie coordination, their movements optimized through Zog's network.
What is this? Cedric stammered, watching his flanks collapse as perfectly supplied and positioned monster units hit his forces from 3 sides simultaneously.
This, Zog murmured to himself, is supply chain management.
The reinforcements weren't just additional troops, they brought with them everything Zog's optimized logistics could provide.
Fresh weapons replaced broken ones. Healing potions, brewed in efficiently organized alchemy labs, reached wounded monsters within minutes. Food and water appeared exactly where and when needed, sustaining the defense indefinitely.
Meanwhile, Cedric's forces began to falter. Their dark mages exhausted their mana.
Their soldiers grew hungry and thirsty. Their siege engines, once terrifying, now sat vulnerable as kobold sabotage teams finally breached the magical shields through sheer persistence. One by one, the siege engines fell silent. Zog descended to the courtyard as the battle turned. The blue mana barrier flickered and died, but no humans remained to charge through. Cedric's army was collapsing, not in a rout, but in a gradual unraveling as supply lines that didn't exist failed to provide what they needed. He found Lord Cedric in the center of what remained of his forces, the noble standing alone as his soldiers surrendered around him. The man's armor was dented, his sword chipped, his eyes hollow.
"It's not fair," Cedric whispered as Zog approached. "You don't fight like a demon lord. You don't fight at all. You just organize."
Organization is a form of power, Zog said quietly.
One you dismissed because it couldn't be held in a sword or a spell. Cedric laughed, a broken sound. We thought we were fighting a monster. But you're something worse. You're a manager. He dropped his sword. It clattered on the stones, the sound final in the sudden quiet. Around them, Zog's unionized monsters began the efficient process of securing prisoners, treating wounded, and assessing damages. His network updated, battle concluded. Victory efficiency rating, 87%. Casualties, 12% of forces, within acceptable parameters given triple bonuses activated. Resource consumption, 68% of stockpiles, replenishment already underway. Morale, 96%, slight dip due to casualties offset by victory bonuses. Zog allowed himself a moment to breathe. The radical nobles were defeated. His territory was secure. His economic model had withstood its greatest test yet, not just against heroes or champions, but against the desperate fury of those who had lost everything to his success. Then his network chimed with a new alert. Not the urgent red of immediate threat, but the ominous yellow of developing concern. Alert: long-range surveillance detects unusual activity in neighboring demon territories. Cross-referencing data patterns? Analysis complete, multiple demon lords are mobilizing forces. Communication intercepts suggest coalition forming. Primary concern: jealousy regarding economic success and territory expansion. Threat assessment: high. Recommended action: prepare for multi-front economic and military competition. Zog stared at the projection only he could see. The data scrolled to troop movements, resource allocations, intercepted messages filled with envy and fear. He had survived the human nobility's last, desperate gamble. He had proven that logistics could defeat dark magic. But now, his own kind was coming for him. And they wouldn't make the same mistakes the humans had. He turned to Grick, who was happily calculating the post-battle profit distributions. Call a meeting of all department heads, Zog said, his voice calm but edged with new determination. We have new market competition to analyze. As the sun set on the battlefield, now being efficiently cleared by goblin cleanup crews working overtime rates, Zog looked north, toward the territories of other demon lords. The battle with the nobles was over. The war for economic dominance of the demon realms was just beginning. The morning after Lord Cedric's surrender dawned with an unsettling quiet over Zog's castle. The air still carried the acrid scent of burned magic and the metallic tang of blood, but the usual clamor of goblin work crews had been replaced by a tense silence. Zog stood on the repaired western wall, his clawed hands resting on the cold stone as his Tactical Oversight Network displayed a cascade of alerts in his mind's eye. Morale, 87%, post-victory surge, but declining due to new threat. Resource efficiency, 94%. Supply chain integrity, 91%. External threat level, critical. 3 demon lords. The names flashed in crimson text: Grum the Blooddrinker, Skarath the Bonecarver, and Vexus the Shadow Weaver. Their territories formed a rough triangle around Zog's domain, and according to the network's predictive algorithms, they had been coordinating for weeks. The data streams showed troop movements, resource stockpiling, and most tellingly, a complete absence of logistical planning. They were preparing for a brute force assault, the kind of mindless violence that had defined demon warfare for centuries. They're coming because we're succeeding, Zog muttered to himself, his voice a low rumble that echoed in the empty corridor behind him. He could see it clearly now: while other demon lords wasted resources on flashy magic and pointless cruelty, his territory had become an economic powerhouse. Trade routes stretched like golden threads across the continent, kobold caravans moved with clockwork precision, and unionized goblins worked triple shifts with smiles on their faces. Success, it seemed, was the ultimate provocation. A soft shuffling sound announced the arrival of Grub, his lead kobold scout. The small, reptilian creature bowed deeply, his scales glistening with morning dew. Master Zog, the coalition forces have crossed the northern border. Grum leads 5,000 blood orcs. Skarath brings 3,000 bone golems. Vexus, her numbers are unclear. Shadows don't count well. Zog's network immediately updated. 5,000 orcs required approximately 15 tons of food daily. 3,000 golems needed magical essence reservoirs.
And shadows needed darkness, which was plentiful, but Vexus's particular brand of shadow weaving required rare lunar crystals. His mind raced through the data, cross-referencing trade manifests and resource reports. "Their supply lines," he said, turning to Grub.
"Show me." Grub unrolled a parchment map, but Zog didn't need it.
His network projected a three-dimensional overlay across his vision.
Red lines marked enemy troop movements. Yellow dots showed their supply depots.
And there, glowing in vulnerable blue, were the critical weak points: a narrow mountain pass where Grom's food wagons had to travel single file, a shallow river crossing where Scaratha's essence caravans were exposed, and a series of underground tunnels where Vexus's crystal shipments moved in darkness.
"They've ignored logistics entirely," Zog said, a faint smile touching his lips.
It was the same mistake the human nobles had made, just on a larger scale.
Grom is feeding his orcs on plunder alone, unsustainable beyond 2 weeks. Scaratha's golems will start crumbling when their essence runs low.
And Vexus, he zoomed in on the tunnel network. Her crystals come from the glimmer-dark caverns,
controlled by neutral earth elementals. Grub's tail twitched with excitement.
"We can disrupt them, Master. My kobolds are already positioned near the mountain pass. A few well-placed rock slides." "No," Zog said, his mind already calculating probabilities.
"Rock slides are temporary. We need systemic collapse. And we need to split their alliance."
He turned, his robes swirling as he strode toward the war room.
"Summon the union representatives. And prepare a trade delegation. We're going to make some offers."
The war room buzzed with activity an hour later. Goblin foremen, kobold merchants, and even a few imps who had risen through the merit-based promotion system crowded around the central table.
Zog stood at the head, his network displaying real-time updates as he spoke.
"The coalition is attacking with force," he began, his voice calm but carrying through the room. "They believe strength comes from numbers and magic.
We know better." He gestured, and the network projected the supply line weak points for all to see.
Grom's food supply passes through the Serpent's Gullet. Scaratha's essence caravans cross the Silver Fork River.
Vexus's crystals move through the glimmer-dark tunnels.
A grizzled goblin named Crick, who had once challenged Zog's authority but now wore the badge of a senior union steward, leaned forward.
"We hit him hard, boss? Sabotage the wagons? Burn the depots?"
"Partially," Zog said.
"But destruction is wasteful.
I want those supplies redirected. Grub, your kobolds will intercept Grom's food shipments at the gullet. Don't destroy them, reroute them to our northern storage facilities.
Offer the wagon drivers triple wages to defect. According to my data, Grom pays his orcs in blood and promises. We pay in gold and benefits."
Grub's eyes gleamed. "The drivers are mostly enslaved gnolls. They'll jump at the offer."
"Good." Zog turned to a kobold merchant with intricate beadwork in her scales. "Liz, you've traded with the earth elementals before. I want you to negotiate an exclusive contract for lunar crystals.
Offer them a 15% profit-sharing deal on all crystal sales, plus infrastructure improvements to their caverns."
Liz bowed. "The elementals care little for demon politics. They'll accept if the terms are favorable."
"Make them favorable," Zog said. "And Crick, take your goblin teams to the Silver Fork.
Scaratha's essence caravans are guarded by skeletal warriors weak to water magic. Use the river to your advantage.
Flood the crossings, capture the essence containers.
But here's the key: leave one caravan intact. Let it through to Scaratha's forces."
Crick scratched his head.
"Why let one through, boss?" "Because Scarath is the weakest link in their alliance," Zog explained, his network highlighting psychological profiles.
"He's paranoid, jealous, and deeply insecure about his creations. When he sees that only he's receiving supplies while Grom and Vexus are being starved, he'll suspect betrayal. And when we offered him a trade deal for his bone golem blueprints..."
Understanding dawned in the room.
Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd.
Zog's network showed morale ticking upward, 89%.
We fight with contracts, not claws, Zog concluded.
Dismissed. Execute immediately.
3 days later, Zog stood on a watchtower overlooking the northern plains. The coalition army was visible on the horizon, a seething mass of orcs, golems, and shifting shadows that blotted out the sunlight. But something was already wrong with their advance.
The network displayed the results of his operations in glowing green text.
Grom's food supply, 62% intercepted, 28% defected with drivers, 10% destroyed in accidents.
Scaratha's essence reserves, 70% captured, 1 caravan delivered as planned. Vexus's lunar crystal shipments, 100% contractually rerouted to Zog's territory.
As Zog watched, the massive army began to slow.
Orcs at the rear were already fighting over dwindling rations. Golems in the center staggered as their essence reserves dipped below critical levels.
And the shadows at the flanks flickered uncertainly. Without fresh crystals, Vexus's magic was weakening. Then the messages started arriving. First came Scaratha's envoy, a trembling bone golem with a scroll clutched in its skeletal hands.
Zog received it in his throne room, surrounded by Union representatives.
The scroll was written in shaky script, demanding an explanation for the treacherous attacks on Scaratha's supply lines while hinting at possible misunderstandings with his allies. Zog dictated a reply on the spot. Tell Scarath that we have captured significant essence reserves, which we are willing to trade for his bone golem manufacturing specifications. Additionally, we offer a 15-year exclusive contract for golem labor in our mining operations, with profit sharing for every golem produced.
The bone golem envoy's eye sockets seemed to widen.
Master Scarath, he will ask why you attack only him. We're not attacking him, Zog said smoothly.
We're offering business opportunities.
And you might mention that Grom's orcs are currently eating their own wounded, while Vexus's shadows are fading. Scaratha's forces are the only ones still receiving supplies, courtesy of our selective interception. As the envoy scurried away, Zog's network pinged with another alert. Vexus herself was attempting shadow communication. A patch of darkness coalesced in the corner of the room, forming into a vaguely feminine shape with glowing violet eyes. Zog, the shadow hissed, its voice like rustling silk.
You steal my crystals.
You will return them, or I will drain the light from your eyes.
Zog didn't flinch. Vexus, I have a proposition.
The Earth Elementals now have an exclusive contract with me for lunar crystals. But I'm willing to sublicense extraction rights to you for a 40% share of all shadow weaving profits generated in your territory. The shadow wavered.
You would trade with me? After I march against you? Business is business, Zog said.
And according to my data, your territory has untapped potential for shadow tourism. People would pay well to experience controlled darkness.
I can help you develop that market.
Or you can continue wasting resources on a war you're already losing. For a long moment, the shadow was silent. Then it whispered, send the contract.
I will consider it. And it dissolved. Morale, 92%.
New trade agreements pending. By the 5th day, the coalition was in disarray. Grom's orcs had begun deserting in droves, lured by rumors of goblin unions offering 3 meals a day in dental plans. Scarath had secretly agreed to the golem blueprint trade, his paranoia having convinced him that Grom and Vexus were plotting against him. And Vexus's shadows had withdrawn entirely, returning to her territory to negotiate the crystal sublicense. But Grom himself remained. The blood-drinker Demon Lord was too proud, too entrenched in old ways to accept defeat through economics.
His network showed Grom rallying his remaining orcs for a final, desperate charge on Zog's castle.
Zog was in the central courtyard, reviewing profit reports from the intercepted supplies, when the challenge came. A massive orc warrior, clad in brass armor and dripping with fresh blood, stomped into the courtyard.
The goblin guards tensed, but Zog waved them back.
Message from Lord Grom, the orc bellowed, his voice echoing off the stone walls.
Your tricks and trades dishonored demonkind. Lord Grom challenges you to single combat. Blade to blade, strength to strength. The winner claims all territories. Do you accept, or are you a coward who hides behind numbers and paperwork?
The courtyard fell silent.
All eyes turned to Zog. His network analyzed the orc's physiological state, elevated heart rate, adrenaline surge, minor malnutrition.
It calculated Grom's probable fighting style based on historical data, brute force, limited stamina, predictable patterns. Zog stepped forward, his mind already optimizing.
He wasn't a warrior.
He had no dark magic to speak of. But he had something better, perfect data.
And he had one advantage: Grom would never understand: logistics won battles before they even began.
Tell Grom I accept, Zog said, his voice calm.
But on my terms.
The duel will be at dawn tomorrow, in the neutral ground between our territories.
No armies, no magic, just the two of us.
And the winner doesn't just claim territories, they gain control of all supply chains and trade networks.
The orc grinned, showing yellowed tusks.
Lord Grom accepts.
He will crush you and feast on your heart.
As the messenger stomped away, Grub scurried to Zog's side.
Master, this is madness.
Grom has slain 100 champions in single combat.
He's twice your size.
Zog looked at the kobold, then at the worried faces of his unionized monsters.
His network displayed their morale, 94%, but with anxiety spikes.
He needed to reassure them. And he needed to prepare.
Size doesn't matter when your opponent is exhausted, Zog said quietly. And Grom will be exhausted.
His orcs have been deserting for days. His supply lines are gone. He's been living on rage alone.
He turned, already planning. Grub, I need you to do 3 things.
First, ensure that no food or water reaches Grom's camp tonight. Second, position kobold observers along his route to the duel site. I want real-time data on his fatigue levels. Third, prepare a merger proposal document. When this is over, we're going to offer Grom a deal he can't refuse.
A merger? Grub blinked.
Economic integration, Zog corrected. His territory has rich iron deposits that our supply chain needs. His orcs make excellent construction workers with proper union representation.
And Zog's network flashed with psychological analysis.
He craves respect more than blood.
We'll give him a seat on the board of directors.
As Zog walked back to his chambers to prepare, his network updated with a final alert. Cohesion of Demon Lord Coalition, 12%, effectively dissolved. Projected outcome of duel, 87% probability of Zog victory through attrition.
Potential economic gains from merger, 300% increase in mineral extraction efficiency.
But beneath the numbers, a new tension hummed.
The challenge was issued. The duel was set.
And for the first time, Zog would have to face brute force directly, with nothing but his wits, his data, and the unshakable belief that logistics could outlast any blade.
The cliffhanger hung in the air as heavy as the coming dawn. Could the Demon Lord of Logistics survive a fight against the Demon Lord of Blood?
The Bloodstone Arena stood silent under a bruised purple sky, its jagged obsidian columns casting long shadows across the cracked basalt floor. Zog stood at the western entrance, his goblin-like form looking almost comically small against the monumental architecture. But the Tactical Oversight Network hummed in his mind, displaying streams of perfect data: ambient temperature 12.3 degrees Celsius, humidity 47%, wind speed 2.1 meters per second from the northwest, Grom's current fatigue level 18% and rising at 0.3% per minute. Across the 300-yard expanse, Grom the Blood Drinker paced like a caged beast. The Demon Lord stood 8 feet tall, his crimson scales catching the fading light, twin horns curving like sides above eyes that burned with orange fire. He carried no weapon, his claws were weapons enough, each talon longer than Zog's forearm. "This is madness," whispered Crix, Zog's lead kobold scout, who stood just outside the arena boundary. "He'll tear you apart in 3 moves."
Zog didn't turn.
"Watch the supply indicators, Crix."
Not the spectacle.
In his mind's eye, the network displayed the real-time logistics feed, 2 hidden tunnels beneath the arena floor, maintained by unionized goblins who had worked triple shifts to prepare them. Tunnel Alpha contained a mobile hydration station, water infused with stamina-enhancing fungi extracts, maintained at exactly 8 degrees Celsius. Tunnel Beta held nutrient packs, medical supplies, and most importantly, the merger proposal documents, printed on vellum treated with preservation enchantments. "Begin," roared the arena master, a grizzled minotaur who served as neutral arbiter.
Grom didn't charge.
He stalked forward, each step deliberate, his massive tail sweeping the dust behind him. "I expected more ceremony, logistics lord," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stones.
"No grand entrance? No magical display?"
Zog remained still, his eyes tracking the data streams.
"Ceremony consumes resources without increasing efficiency.
My analysis suggests you've already expended 2,100 calories in pre-duel posturing. Your glycogen reserves are at 78% capacity." Grom paused, his fiery eyes narrowing.
"You mock me?" Observation. Not mockery. Zog's network pinged. Grom's adrenaline levels spiked 15%, increasing his attack probability by 22% in the next 30 seconds.
"You'll likely use a lunging claw strike from your dominant right side, aiming for my torso. The optimal dodge vector is left backward at a 37-degree angle."
The Demon Lord's roar shook dust from the arena columns. He exploded forward, exactly as predicted, his right claw sweeping in a deadly arc. Zog moved with economical precision, sidestepping just enough that the talons passed an inch from his tunic. The movement cost him 47 calories. Grom's expenditure, 312 calories.
"First exchange efficiency rating, 86%, Zog murmured to himself, the network automatically logging the data.
Defensive optimization successful.
Grom recovered, breathing slightly harder.
Lucky dodge. Probability-based preparation. Zog's eyes flickered as he accessed another data stream. Your breathing pattern indicates early fatigue.
Your last meal was 6 hours ago, roasted dire boar, approximately 4,200 calories.
Digestion is consuming 18% of your current energy output. Enough.
Grom charged again, this time with a complex combination, a feint with his left, followed by a tail sweep aimed at Zog's legs. The network had already calculated the pattern 3 seconds earlier.
Zog dropped into a crouch, letting the tail pass overhead, then rolled toward Tunnel Alpha's hidden access point.
As he rose, his hand found the concealed lever, a stone that looked identical to all others but had been polished to reduce friction coefficient by 34%.
Running already? Grom taunted, advancing again. Zog didn't answer. He triggered the mechanism.
A section of floor slid open silently, and a goblin hand emerged, passing him a chilled water flask.
The entire exchange took 1.7 seconds. Hydration break, Zog announced, taking a measured sip.
Maintaining optimal fluid levels improves cognitive function by 14% and reaction time by 9%. You're welcome to your own supplies, though my scouts report your water skins contain ordinary well water, not enhanced. Grom stared, his rage momentarily displaced by confusion.
What trickery is this? Logistical support. Standard in any prolonged engagement.
Zog finished drinking, returned the flask, and the floor sealed seamlessly. My efficiency rating remains at 94%.
Yours has dropped to 71% after that last combination attack. The tail sweep alone consumed 420 calories for minimal tactical gain.
The Demon Lord began circling, his movements growing more measured. Zog tracked the data. Grom's core temperature had risen to 39.2 degrees Celsius, 1.8 degrees above optimal fighting range.
His decision-making latency increased by 0.3 seconds per minute. For 20 minutes, the pattern repeated.
Grom attacked with increasingly desperate combinations, claw swipes, tail strikes, even attempts at magical bursts that fizzled as his concentration wavered. Each time, Zog dodged with minimal movement, his network predicting every attack vector based on muscle fatigue indicators, breathing patterns, and even subtle shifts in Grom's weight distribution.
Between exchanges, Zog accessed the tunnels.
At minute 12, a nutrient bar packed with fast-metabolizing carbohydrates. At minute 18, a cooling cloth applied to his neck, reducing his body temperature by 0.7 degrees Celsius. At minute 24, a brief massage from a goblin physiotherapist to prevent lactic acid buildup.
Grom, meanwhile, was deteriorating visibly.
His scales had lost their luster, his breathing came in ragged gasps, and sweat, actual sweat, something Zog's data indicated was rare for his species, beaded on his brow. This isn't combat, Grum panted, leaning against a column.
You're not fighting. Correct. Zog consulted his network.
Combat efficiency analysis. Traditional demonic dueling has a 63% waste factor in unnecessary movements, dramatic flourishes, and psychological intimidation attempts that consume energy without affecting outcomes.
My approach has a 7% waste factor. You dishonor the duel. I optimize it. Zog's eyes glowed faintly as he pulled up the merger proposal. Which brings me to my next point. Your current fatigue level is at 67%. Mine is at 12%. Statistically, you cannot win.
But victory through attrition serves neither of us efficiently. Grum pushed off from the column, his claws digging grooves in the stone.
What are you proposing?
A merger.
Zog gestured, and from Tunnel Beta, a goblin emerged with a scroll case. Not surrender. Integration.
My Tactical Oversight Network indicates your territory contains 3 untapped lunar crystal deposits, a goblin population operating at 31% efficiency due to poor management, and trade routes that could be optimized to increase revenue by 240%. The Demon Lord stared at the scroll case as if it were a venomous serpent.
You want my lands?
I want to increase their productivity.
Under current management, your domain generates 12,000 gold worth of resources monthly, with 68% lost to inefficiency, theft, and spoilage.
Under my logistics network, that increases to 38,000 gold monthly, with only 9% losses.
Zog unrolled the first page. You retain nominal sovereignty and receive 40% of increased profits. Your goblins unionize with full benefits.
Your supply chains integrate with mine, reducing costs by.
Enough numbers.
Grum roared, but the fury had drained from his voice, replaced by exhaustion and something else, curiosity.
You'd truly share profits?
Profit sharing increases worker morale by an average of 42%, which boosts productivity by 28%.
It's mathematically sound.
Zog approached, stopping at what the network calculated was exactly outside Grum's maximum lunge range.
Look at the data.
He tossed the scroll. Grum caught it clumsily, his talons nearly tearing the vellum. For a long minute, the Demon Lord stared at the figures, projections, efficiency charts, resource allocation maps.
The network tracked his pupil dilation, breathing rate, and micro-expressions.
Probability of acceptance, rising from 18% to 64% and climbing.
My warriors. Grum began.
Retain their positions with a 15% pay increase in comprehensive healthcare, including magical injury coverage.
My unions have negotiated excellent rates with healing shamans. My personal hoard
grows by approximately 9,200 gold monthly under this model, versus its current stagnant state. I've included a clause preventing audit of personal assets, privacy matters for morale.
Grum's shoulders slumped, not in defeat but in calculation.
He looked from the scroll to Zog, to the arena where he'd expected glorious battle, then back to the numbers.
The other demon lords, Skarath and Vexus, already signed similar agreements yesterday. Skaratha's bone golem production has increased 300% with my optimized assembly lines. Vexus's crystal licensing revenue doubled in the first week. Zog allowed the faintest smile. The coalition wasn't broken. It was acquired. Silence stretched across the arena.
The Minotaur Arbiter shifted impatiently, but Zog's network indicated Grum's decision matrix was approaching critical mass.
Acceptance probability, 89%. What about the duel? Grum asked finally.
Concluded with mutually beneficial negotiation. The Arbiter's contract allows for economic resolution as valid conclusion. Zog produced a second scroll, the duel's terms, with the relevant clause highlighted. My legal team reviewed it thoroughly. Grum stared at the highlighted text, then let out a sound that was half growl, half laugh.
You planned this from the beginning. Optimization requires planning, yes.
The Demon Lord rolled the merger scroll tightly, his claws careful now.
I want 45% of increased profits. 41%. My network calculates that's the equilibrium point between your satisfaction and my operational costs. Deal.
Grum extended a massive hand. Zog shook it, his own hand disappearing in the grip.
The network pinged agreement finalized, integration protocols initiating.
Across the continent, supply routes reconfigured, resource allocations adjusted, and thousands of unionized monsters received notification of the new territorial alignment.
As they left the arena, Crix fell into step beside Zog. That was anticlimactic.
Efficient, Zog corrected.
Casualty count, 0. Resource expenditure, minimal.
Territory gained, 800 square miles with valuable deposits.
Return on investment, approximately 9,000% over the next fiscal year.
They emerged into what had once been the borderlands between territories, now a seamless continuum.
Goblin work crews were already dismantling the old checkpoint, their union banners fluttering in the evening breeze.
Kobold scouts moved along optimized patrol routes, their profit-sharing bonuses already calculated and queued for distribution. Back in his command center, no longer a crumbling castle but a sleek operations hub with real-time logistics displays covering every wall, Zog watched the final integration complete. The Tactical Oversight Network showed the entire continent now, a web of perfect supply chains radiating from his territory. Human kingdoms, dwarf holds, elf enclaves, and now all major demon domains, all connected, all dependent on the flow of resources he optimized.
Morale, 100%. Resource efficiency, 98%. Growth potential, unlimited. For the first time since his reincarnation, Zog allowed himself to lean back in his ergonomically optimized chair.
The corporate analyst in him noted the satisfaction metrics rising, but the Demon Lord of Logistics simply watched the numbers flow, a symphony of perfect efficiency. Then the network pinged, not the usual soft notification, but a sharp, urgent alert in crimson glyphs that hovered before his eyes.
Anomaly detected. Interdimensional signature. Spatial coordinates, Alpha 7, Theta 22, Omega 15.
Energy readings, exotic matter, non-standard physics.
Threat assessment, logistical disruption probability 94%. Estimated arrival, 72 hours. Recommended response, optimize interdimensional supply chains.
Zog sat forward, his fingers already moving across the interface, pulling up resource allocations, calculating exotic matter requirements, and drafting union contracts for dimensional workers he hadn't known existed until this moment. Somewhere beyond the world, something was coming. And it would learn that here, in this corner of existence, war wasn't won with swords or spells. It was won with perfectly timed deliveries.